3 hours of ethical codes that collapse under pressure, to fall asleep, to what if the rules you live by, the codes you swear are right, begin to tremble when things get hard. What if the very idea of being good collapses under the weight of life's messiness? Imagine a fire alarm ringing in a library. The ethical code says, stay quiet. The survival code says, run. Which one do you obey? Or picture a soldier, trained never to question, suddenly asked to choose between duty and conscience. Tonight, we step into the quiet collapse of moral certainty, not to solve it, not to fix it, but to feel it. This isn't a lecture, it's a drift, a meditation through the fault lines of philosophy, where even the noblest virtues begin to crack under pressure. You'll hear stories, paradoxes, and questions with no answers, because sometimes the most honest thing we can do is rest beside the unsolved. So take a breath, unclench your grip on certainty, let your mind soften, and together, let's float into the gentle unraveling of the codes we thought we had to live by. The quiet weight of a broken compass. There's a moment, not loud, not dramatic, when something you believed in starts to fail you. It doesn't break like glass. It bends, warps, almost politely. A code you lived by, a line you wouldn't cross. And now, you find yourself stepping over it. 2 people walk into a late-night diner. One asks the other, "Is it still good if no one gets hurt?" The other stirs their tea, silent. Maybe, but that's not the same as being right. And then they don't speak again for a while. Sometimes what unravels isn't the rule, but the reason we followed it. You were taught that honesty is good, that loyalty is noble, that justice matters. But one day, you find yourself hesitating before telling the truth because it might break someone, or staying loyal to something you've outgrown, or watching justice come down like a hammer on the wrong person. This isn't about turning bad. It's about getting quiet, realizing the map no longer fits the landscape. Ethical codes feel eternal, like stars. But stars too can die, not with a bang, but with a fade, a soft, almost unnoticeable flicker. The north you always trusted starts spinning. Someone holds the elevator door open a few seconds longer. He smiles at a stranger and says, "You looked like you needed this today." There's no rule for that, no reward, just a tiny act that makes the room warmer. Maybe some truths aren't written in stone, but in gestures. So why do values collapse under pressure? Is it weakness? Or is it wisdom waking up? Maybe the pressure isn't the problem. Maybe the problem is the rigidity, the assumption that one code can fit every storm. When the compass breaks, some people panic. Others listen to the silence, to the shift, to the soft hum of something ancient beneath the rules, something not taught, but known. You begin to suspect, maybe the compass didn't fail. Maybe it was meant to lead you here, to the question behind the question, the kind that doesn't need to be answered tonight, or ever, just held. A voice, gentle and close, reminds you, it's okay to feel lost. It's okay to rest now. Let it all loosen. The definitions, the duties, the demands. What if nothing is wrong with you? What if the collapse is the beginning? As we drift further into this sea of inquiry, let's follow the next current, where doing good becomes complicated and kindness starts to ache. The double-edged sword of utilitarianism. In the soft silence of ethical reasoning, utilitarianism often arrives like a hero in shining logic, clean, confident, and committed to one idea, the greatest good for the greatest number. It seems so simple, so comforting. A moral calculator that lets us weigh happiness against suffering and choose the path that leaves the most people smiling. But what happens when the numbers begin to speak louder than the people behind them? I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? One voice murmurs, save 5 lives even if it means losing one. And what if that one is you? The other replies, not unkindly. Or someone you love. A long pause hangs between them. Not because there's no answer, but because the answer costs something. That's the dilemma at the heart of utilitarianism. The logic is elegant, almost too elegant. But when applied to real human lives, the math begins to feel sharp, like a blade dressed up as reason. Consider the thought experiment. A doctor, 5 patients each needing a different organ to survive, and one healthy person who just walked in for a checkup. Should the doctor sacrifice the one to save the 5? The math might whisper, yes, but your breath catches, your stomach tightens. You don't need a philosophy degree to know something's wrong, because even if the arithmetic balances, something inside you doesn't. That tension is the fracture where utilitarianism begins to show its edge. When consequences rule over principles, people stop being people. They become variables. And once we reduce individuals to means for a greater end, compassion mutates into calculation. History, unfortunately, doesn't treat this as theory. It treats it as precedent. Surveillance states have claimed they were protecting the majority. Wars have been justified with charts and graphs of strategic necessity. Even atrocities have been framed in the language of utility. Sacrifices must be made, always for the greater good. But if a moral system demands that the pain of the few must be erased, ignored, or rationalized away, can it truly be called moral? Have you ever been part of one of those group decisions? The voice returns, softer now, where what felt right to most left someone quietly breaking? The memory comes. A vote at school, a choice at work, a silence you held because the majority was louder. You didn't speak up. Maybe you weren't sure how. Maybe you agreed at the time. But now, looking back, there's a bruise on the conscience that numbers never recorded. This is the double-edged sword. Utilitarianism tries to be kind, but it can become cold. It tries to reduce suffering, but sometimes forgets the soul behind the statistic. The ones who fall through the cracks are not always nameless. Sometimes they are us. Let's take this reflection with us into the next chamber of thought, where the blade turns inward. We'll explore the idea of self-sacrifice, not as a virtue, but as a mask, a stage where the ego sometimes plays martyr, calling it nobility, while secretly craving applause. The martyr's trap, when sacrifice becomes ego. A quiet breath, then another. The world teaches us to admire the ones who carry the weight, the silent heroes, the ones who stay up late, say yes when they're tired, who pour until there's nothing left inside them. But beneath that soft halo of admiration, something flickers, a small, sharp question. Is it still a gift, if part of you hopes to be noticed for giving it? 2 people walk side by side in a corridor. One glances at the other and speaks gently, as if confessing something private but familiar. You ever do everything for someone and then get quietly disappointed they didn't thank you? The other chuckles, not cruelly, just knowingly. Yeah, and then I act like I didn't care, but I do, deeply. That's the trap. Martyrdom, when pure, is silent. It doesn't demand applause. It doesn't clutch onto suffering as if it's a badge. But over time, even sacrifice can become seductive. especially if it becomes your identity. I am the one who endures. I am the one who never complains. And then, in secret corners of the mind, ego begins to feed off that narrative. And when pain becomes proof of value, rest becomes betrayal. Think of how often noble suffering gets rewarded, not with healing, but with more expectation. You helped once, so now you must. You stayed late once, so now they assume. And because you've built yourself around being the dependable one, saying no feels like self-erasure, a whisper between strangers at a bus stop, soft like dusk. He's always working, never takes a break. I know, he's amazing. I wish I had that kind of strength. But beneath the compliment is a prison with velvet bars. Sometimes it's not that we want to help, it's that we want to be seen helping, to be the one who gave everything, to be remembered even if it hurts. But here's the gentler truth. Not all pain is proof of goodness. Not all exhaustion is sacred. And sometimes, the most loving act isn't another sacrifice. It's the courage to stop needing to be seen as good. A quiet moment now. Let it settle. Let the thought rest beside you without rushing it away. Have you ever offered more than you had? Just to keep being the one who gives? And if so, what would happen if you forgave yourself for stepping back? We drift now from the silent pride of the martyr to a different kind of moral confusion. A kindness that kills softly, a smile that protects what should have been let go. Let's step gently into that shadow. The next segment waits, not to judge, but to unravel, like a knot untied in sleep. Close your eyes if you haven't already. You're doing just fine. The kindness that enables cruelty. There is a certain kind of cruelty that does not shout or strike. It whispers, it smiles, it nods along politely, and in its silence, it allows suffering to deepen unnoticed. You've seen it before, perhaps in a quiet classroom, where a teacher refuses to discipline the child who disrupts everyone's peace. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much to cause pain. Or maybe you've been the friend who notices the wine bottle multiplying each night, but says nothing. They're going through a lot, you tell yourself. It's not my place. But deep down, you know, you've seen it begin to unravel. And yet, out of love, or maybe fear, you stay quiet. Isn't kindness supposed to help people? It is, she replies softly. But helping without honesty is just hiding in kindness's clothes. Real kindness isn't always sweet. Sometimes it's sharp, like clean scissors cutting away the rot. It says what needs to be said, even when voices tremble. It protects the person and the people around them, not from pain, but from collapse. The truth is, we often confuse softness for compassion. We think being kind means avoiding confrontation, but unchecked empathy becomes passivity. And passivity, in the face of harm, is no different than permission. He turns toward her on the park bench, where dry leaves gather at their feet. So, saying nothing can be cruel? She doesn't answer at first, just watches a child on a scooter veer too close to the road, until a parent gently but firmly pulls him back. That's love, she finally says. Not the kind that lets you fall, the kind that catches you, even when you're angry about it. True kindness risks being misunderstood. It dares to set limits. It asks for change. It shows up not just with a hand to hold, but with a mirror to face. Because to truly love someone is to want their wholeness, not just their momentary comfort. There is a sacred courage in choosing discomfort now to protect someone's future. And sometimes, the kindest thing we can do is the hardest thing we've ever done. Breathe with that. Let it settle. Ask yourself gently, who in your life have you protected in ways that may have extended their suffering? Not out of malice, but out of fear, or habit, or conflict avoidance. Forgiveness isn't always enough. Sometimes the medicine is a boundary. Sometimes the healing begins with truth. And now, from this soft knife of kindness, we drift toward a deeper question, one older than civilization itself. If all ethics begin with do no harm, then what do we do when harm hides in the absence of action? Close your eyes. Let the question come with you into the next breath. The lie. Hidden in do no harm, they say do no harm, as if the world were that still, as if kindness were a straight line and silence a refuge. But the heart knows otherwise. A nurse once whispered this phrase into a dim hallway while wrapping a wound. Her hands were steady, her voice gentle. But the patient, years later, would say the memory of being pitied hurt more than the stitches. Isn't it strange how some things meant to heal sting deeper than the pain they were trying to erase? You lend a hand. You say the right thing. You back away to give someone space. But what if your stepping back is what made them fall? In a world braided with unseen consequences, every decision is a pebble in water. The ripples reach shores we cannot see. And while we may vow to do no harm, life doesn't always wait for our vows. Why didn't you say anything? The question hung between two friends in a car parked outside a grocery store. Because I didn't want to hurt you, the other said. A beat of silence, a breath too long. You did anyway, just slower. Silence can be a gentle violence. It pretends to protect while truth drowns quietly beneath it. And what of those moments when we tried to help, offered advice, spoke from love, acted with urgency, only to be met with distance, resentment, collapse? Because helping isn't always clean. Sometimes your best intention becomes someone else's unraveling. Sometimes the medicine bruises more than the disease, and so the fantasy of harm-free choices begins to melt. Ethical purity? A glass castle in a hurricane. No act is untouched. No decision exists in isolation. Even compassion has teeth when applied without understanding. A woman once stepped aside in line for someone in a rush. He smiled, grateful. That same man? He missed his train by seconds because he stopped to buy coffee. That ripple, it led him home an hour later than usual, into a moment he would carry in silence for years. Not her fault, but not unconnected either. So what now? If even love can sting and stillness can wound, what does right even look like? Maybe it's not about doing no harm. Maybe it's about becoming aware of the harm we cannot avoid, taking ownership of it, softening its edge where we can, and when the storm comes, steering with open eyes, not sealed lips. You see, ethics isn't armor, it's a compass. And some nights the needle trembles. You meant well, that counts. But it doesn't erase the waves, only acknowledges that you were brave enough to wade in. And as we float further into this dream state of dilemmas, we begin to touch something more primal. The moment when justice forgets itself and begins to sharpen its claws. Let your breath carry you there. We'll walk softly. The storm hasn't ended, it's simply shifted shape. When justice becomes vengeance in disguise, it begins with a noble word, justice, a word that tastes of fairness, order, healing. We whisper it when wronged, we shout it when outraged. But if you listen closely, beneath its syllables, you might hear a growl, a wound too raw to heal, a memory that flinches Because sometimes what we call justice is only vengeance rehearsed in moral language. Did you see what they posted? Yeah, disgusting. Good thing they got fired. Finally, some accountability. Accountability or just revenge that makes us feel better? The line trembles there, barely visible. True justice seeks to restore equilibrium, to honor both the harmed and the healing. But vengeance wants someone to hurt. It isn't always violent. Sometimes it's viral. A public apology isn't enough. A punishment isn't enough. Because behind the desire for consequence, there's a quieter craving to make someone feel what we felt. And when pain leads, logic limps behind. Picture a digital crowd chanting through screens. At first, it feels righteous. We're protecting the weak, exposing the lies, unmasking the abusers. But soon, the rhythm changes. What began as accountability morphs into spectacle. One mistake becomes a lifetime sentence. Forgiveness feels like betrayal. Compassion seems weak. We trade empathy for outrage, reflection for reaction. The flame of pain, once lit for warmth, becomes wildfire. Do you think they deserved all of that? I don't know. Maybe not. But it felt good seeing them go down. And that's the part that scares me. That feeling of satisfaction in someone else's downfall is ancient, older than laws, older than civilizations. It lives in our shadows, waiting for a wound deep enough to let it out. But justice is not about feeding that hunger. It's about refusing to. Because justice without mercy is a knife without a handle. You may strike with it, but you'll bleed too. Vengeance speaks in the language of injury. But justice, if it's true, speaks in the language of maturity. It says, what happened matters, but how we respond matters even more. So pause now. Can you remember a time when your call for justice carried a silent wish for someone to suffer? When punishment felt personal? When the scale you held in your mind tipped not toward balance, but toward satisfaction? This isn't about shame. It's about noticing the difference. A difference not in result, but in intent. Justice repairs, vengeance repeats. And as we breathe out that reflection, we drift toward a more difficult question, one that holds its own fire. Can you be tolerant of the intolerant? Let's go there next. Gently. The paradox of tolerance. It starts quietly, like the soft shuffle of a stranger's shoes beside you in a quiet hallway. At first, they're just passing by. Then they begin to hum. The tune doesn't bother you, not really, until it gets louder, until it echoes, until you realize it's no longer just a hallway. It's become a stage, and they've taken the mic. We're told that to live in a free world is to accept all voices, that everyone has a right to speak. But what happens when that freedom becomes the weapon? When someone uses it not to express, but to erase, not to share, but to shout down? A young man once said to his friend in a cafe, "If I believe in free speech, do I have to let him say that?" The friend stirred her coffee slowly. "That depends," she said. "Do you want free speech or just the illusion of it?" Karl Popper called it the tolerance paradox, the idea that too much tolerance can kill tolerance itself. Like a fire fed with too much air, it stops warming and starts consuming. When we let hatred speak freely, it doesn't just coexist, it recruits, it spreads, and slowly it teaches others to stop listening, to stop trusting, to stop allowing. But here's the whisper beneath the warning. If we silence them first, have we already lost? Because who draws the line? Who names the danger? What if the one holding the muzzle becomes the next to howl? A woman once stood at a bookstore counter, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to carry his book, but I also don't want to be told what I can't carry." The clerk smiled gently. "So you want the freedom to choose, not the comfort of certainty." This is the tightrope we walk in open societies. We balance not on laws, but on judgment, on restraint, on the invisible threads of mutual respect. And yet, those threads fray the moment someone tugs too hard. It's like walking into a room where the air changes. Subtle at first. You feel it in the way someone looks at another, in a joke not meant for everyone, in silence louder than protest. That's how intolerance begins, not with fire, but with temperature. So here we are, holding the match and the bucket of water, both, trying to decide whether to protect the flame or put it out. Can you defend openness by closing a door? Can you preserve respect by denying a voice? Sometimes protecting the garden means building a gate, not to lock people out, but to protect what's growing inside. But then again, who holds the key? And now, if you're still awake, feel free to let this drift deeper, from the noise of crowds to the silence of self. Because next, we cross into the burden of seeing clearly in a world that prefers the comfort of blur. The burden of knowing too much. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when knowledge shifts from a gift to a weight. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It settles quietly in the chest, like a stone beneath the ribs. You've seen something, you understand something, and now you cannot unsee it. Did you read that article last night? Yeah, about the mining town, the kids with mercury poisoning. And I wish I hadn't. Awareness is not always illumination. Sometimes it dims the room. It makes the walls feel closer, the silence louder. Ethical insight isn't just a moral compass. It can be a mirror too clear, showing the cracks in systems, the shadows in people, the complicity in ourselves. Consider the whistleblower who walks into a room already burning, knowing that if they speak, they become the flame, or the soldier who returns home, not just with scars on the body, but with truths no one wants to hear. When you've seen how things really work, the bedtime stories of justice and virtue no longer lull you to sleep. There's that line we all know: with great power comes great responsibility. But what if the power isn't authority or strength, but simply awareness? And what if that awareness demands more than you're ready to give? There's no switch to turn it off. Once you know, the silence becomes a decision, a choice. Why didn't you say anything in the meeting? I thought about it. I wanted to. But they already made up their minds. So you just sat there? I didn't sit there. I held my breath for 20 minutes. To know and remain still, it may look like cowardice from the outside, but often it's exhaustion, not apathy. The moral weight doesn't just ask for courage. It demands energy, time, clarity, endurance, sometimes all at once. And when you've been carrying that awareness for days, weeks, years, how do you keep showing up? How do you speak when every word echoes into an empty room? Still, silence isn't neutral. It grows roots. It can suffocate. And over time, not speaking becomes its own kind of betrayal, not just of others, but of yourself. The one who first opened their eyes, the one who promised quietly, "I'll do something, eventually." But what if no one listens? Then I'll be the echo, the last one, until someone finally does. Is it moral to scream when no one hears you? Perhaps, because screaming isn't always about being heard. Sometimes it's about staying human, So take a breath now. Let the weight rest, but not bury you. You are not alone in knowing, and you are not weak for feeling heavy. From the sharp ache of too much awareness, we slip gently into another quiet crisis, the kind soul frozen not by ignorance, but by the unbearable urge to help and not knowing how. The empathy that paralyzes action. There's a strange silence that follows the wave of feeling, not a peaceful silence, but one heavy with helplessness. You meant to help. You wanted to make a difference, but somehow the weight of emotion wrapped itself around your ankles like seaweed, and you didn't move. You just felt. Empathy, we are told, is the highest virtue. It softens the heart, connects us to one another, allows us to imagine pain we haven't lived. But in its purest, rawest form, empathy doesn't always lead to action. Sometimes it leads to collapse. You're walking into a room filled with sorrow, refugees who've lost their homes, patients who can't afford care, a friend who hasn't smiled in weeks. You open yourself to it all. You let their sadness pour into you. You sit beside them and weep, not just with them, but for them. And then, nothing. No fix. No step forward. Just the ache. A quiet voice breaks through. Shouldn't caring this much mean you'll act? But what if acting feels like betrayal? Like touching a wound you're not allowed to heal? Empathy, unchecked, can become a whirlpool. The more you feel, the harder it is to rise. You begin to confuse suffering with service, assuming that drowning in someone else's grief is the same as lifting them out of it. But tears alone do not feed the hungry. Awareness alone does not stop the bleeding. And here's the cruel paradox. The most sensitive among us, the ones who could offer the most love, often do the least, simply because they feel too much. They're not lazy. They're not uncaring. They're frozen, like a deer who sees the car but not the path away. So what do I do? One voice asks in the dark. You move, the other answers gently, even if your hands shake. Ethical empathy acts. It doesn't wait for the feelings to settle into neat boxes. It stumbles forward. It risks saying the wrong thing, doing too little, or being misunderstood. It dares to be imperfect, because doing something flawed is better than doing nothing wrapped in virtue. True empathy doesn't worship emotion. It uses it, like a compass, not a destination. Like fire, not just to warm you, but to light the way. Now close your eyes for a moment. Can you remember a time when you felt so deeply that it swallowed your voice? You might have told yourself that just being present was enough, and maybe it was. But maybe, just maybe, it was also an escape from the harder thing, the doing. As the tide of emotion recedes, something quieter begins to emerge, a new kind of question, not about feeling, but about truth, not about the heart, but about the blade hidden in words. And so, we drift now into the next current, where we ask, can the truth sometimes cut too deep to be spoken out loud? Let's keep floating. The honesty that wounds. Somewhere between a whisper and a confession lives the impulse to speak the truth. It rises in the throat like heat, noble in intent, but dangerous if released too suddenly. I'm just being honest, we say, as if that alone clears us of responsibility. But truth is not a sterile thing. It is warm or cold, sharp or soft. And when we forget this, our honesty becomes a blade, when a fire meant to warm a home. And now imagine pouring gasoline instead of care. The fire grows, yes, but it consumes. That is what truth can do when spoken without grace, when its edges aren't softened by compassion, when its timing is off, when the tone trembles with frustration or pride. "Do you think I'm good enough?" she asked, eyes wide, hoping. "You've never really impressed me," he answered, voice flat. Truthful? Maybe. But what seed did that plant in her chest? Was it growth or grief? There's a strange comfort in being brutally honest, a power in it. It feels like tearing off a mask, yours or someone else's. But too often, that power hides something more primitive, the urge to dominate, to release anger, to rid ourselves of discomfort at another's delusion. And so, we throw honesty like a hammer and call it virtue. But real truth, the kind that liberates, is patient. It waits for the soil to be ready. It knows when silence will do more good than words. It understands that just because something is true doesn't mean it must be said now, or that way, or by you. I should tell her the truth, right? Maybe. But ask first, do you want to help her, or just be right? There is a third path, often forgotten. Truth spoken like rain, not hail. Truth that doesn't land with a thud, but arrives gently. Not deluded, not dishonest, but mindful. Like a hand extended, not a verdict delivered. The virtue signal that blinds the virtue. There's a strange stillness in the air tonight, as if the world is pausing, holding its breath. You can feel it, can't you? That quiet ache beneath appearances, a longing not just to be good, but to be seen as good. And maybe that's where the trouble begins. We live in an age where goodness has an audience, where moral clarity is tweeted in bold font, and compassion wears hashtags like medals. But there's a tension behind that glow, an invisible thread pulling our actions toward performance. Because now, more than ever, it's easy to mistake the spotlight for the sacred. In a soft cafe, two coworkers sit by the window. One leans over and says quietly, "Did you see the CEO's post? All about equality and inclusion." The other stirs her tea slowly. "Yeah," she murmurs. "He's still refusing paid maternity leave." There's a pause, comfortable at first, then heavier. It's not that the words were wrong. It's that the life behind them didn't echo. And that is the paradox. The more we display our virtues, the less pressure we feel to embody them. Applause can trick the conscience into thinking it has already acted. So we decorate our feeds with borrowed convictions. We repost, retweet, reframe, and slowly we rehearse morality more than we live it. But goodness, real goodness, is often quiet. It shows up when no one's keeping score. It waits in line, lets others speak, gives without posting receipts. It stays behind after the protest to sweep up the trash. It calls a parent back. It forgives before it's asked. A woman at the bus stop once turned and said, "You dropped something." It wasn't my wallet, just a wrapper from my pocket. But the tone, it was kindness without a camera, care without commentary. And maybe that's what we're being called back to. An ethics that doesn't advertise, one that doesn't need a platform, one that chooses the right thing when no one will know. Because the most profound virtue is often hidden, like a seed in winter, quiet, patient, invisible, until it blooms. Let yourself breathe now. Let that idea stretch through your ribs. When was the last time your values spoke, not with your voice, but through your habits? And now, just beyond the curtain of moral appearance, we step into a darker chamber. One where loyalty, so often praised, morphs into betrayal cloaked in duty. Keep breathing. We're still traveling together. When loyalty betrays integrity. There's something warm about the word loyalty. It wraps around you like an old coat, soft from years of wear, comforting in its familiarity. We associate it with devotion, with being dependable, standing by someone when the world turns cold. But like all coats worn too long, loyalty can grow threadbare in the wrong places, and sometimes it hides holes we refuse to see. Would you lie for me? A simple question. It's just one time. You know I didn't mean to hurt anyone. The soft weight of expectation settles like dusk in a quiet room. Loyalty can become a velvet muzzle. It asks not just for support, but for silence. Sometimes for denial. And sometimes, without us even noticing, for complicity. A friend defends another not because they are right, but because they are theirs. A sibling hides a truth because it would shatter the fragile peace. A worker stays quiet about injustice because the paycheck depends on it. The lines blur, slowly, quietly, dangerously. Do you think he actually believes what he did was okay? I think he's scared, and I think I'm the only one who's still standing next to him. There's a kind of nobility in standing by someone, but there's also a cost. When your loyalty asks you to deny what you know is right, who are you really betraying? Them? Or yourself? Integrity has no allies. It walks barefoot, often alone, across rough terrain. It doesn't scream. It doesn't plead. It simply is. A quiet presence that won't flinch, even when pressed. While loyalty often thrives in groups, in tribes, in families, integrity exists in solitude. It asks you to be still in a storm of pressure, to hold your truth when voices around you say, "Protect us." And that's where the break happens, not in grand moments, but in the small silences, the quiet head nods, the times we didn't speak up, the nights we told ourselves, "I'm not the one who did it. I'm just staying out of it." You were quiet at dinner. Everything okay? I just didn't want to make things worse. Sometimes silence is what makes it worse. It's easy to mistake silence for peace, but peace built on denial isn't peace. It's pause, and eventually, it breaks. There's a wound that comes from betraying yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. At first, it feels like selflessness. Later, it feels like regret. And beneath that regret lies a truth. Loyalty without reflection is a beautiful way to lose yourself. So ask yourself now, gently, as you rest your head, was there a time your silence protected someone who should have been held accountable? And more tender still, was there a moment when your loyalty cost you a piece of who you are? Let the question float. No answer needed right away. Let it echo softly, like a tide pulling out. Because now, from the stillness of moral conflict, we step into the next illusion, the soft glow of heroism, the quiet, consuming pull of wanting to be the savior. The savior complex, helping to be seen. Helping. You hear someone knocking at your door, not loudly, but insistently, as if the act of arrival mattered more than the reason. That's how some people show up in your life, not to listen, not to ease the weight, but to be seen holding it. There's a kind of help that glows quietly, like candlelight on a windowsill, steady, unseen, asking nothing. And then there's the help that flickers like a flare gun, hoping someone, anyone, is watching. The kind that needs to be noticed, needs to be thanked, needs to be needed. "Hey," one voice says as you both walk into the dim kitchen of a shared memory. "Do you remember when I helped you move that night?" You pause, feeling the strange warmth of that recollection, yet also the invisible hook in their words. "Yeah, of course," you reply, not quite sure if this is gratitude or guilt being served. The savior complex is subtle. It wears generosity like perfume, beautiful but strong. It moves toward distress like a moth to a flame, not always to extinguish the fire, but to dance in its reflection. The wounded become props, and every kind gesture has an audience, even if that audience is just the mirror. There's a certain pride in helping, and that's natural. But when the pride grows louder than the pain it's trying to ease, something shifts. Suddenly, we're no longer lifting others, we're elevating ourselves through them. Why do you think they always rush to the rescue? One person asks in a low conversation on a long train ride. The other stirs their tea gently before answering. Maybe they're trying to save a part of themselves they couldn't reach in time. And in that moment, silence falls like snowfall, soft, reflective, unblaming. True service is like rain. It arrives, nourishes, and leaves quietly. It doesn't watermark the ground with its name. It doesn't ask the flower to remember it. But the savior complex? It plants seeds only where it knows it will be praised. It keeps others small, unintentionally, so it can keep being the hero in the story. It doesn't trust people to rise without its hand beneath them. That's the paradox. What looks like generosity can become control. What begins as kindness can bend into dependency. And once you've tasted the identity of being the one who saves, stepping away feels like vanishing. So pause here. Have you ever offered help? Not because it was needed, but because you needed to feel necessary? Have you ever reached out and secretly hoped they wouldn't stand up without you? There's no judgment here, only the soft glow of recognition, only the quiet question echoing in your chest. Because real love doesn't rush in for applause. It enters silently, stays if welcomed, and leaves when it's no longer needed. Let your breath soften now. Let the noise of worthiness fade. You are already enough, even when you're not fixing anyone. And as the helper steps back, we turn gently toward the next idea, one even more nuanced. Forgiveness, a balm, yes, but also a blade, when used to hold power instead of offering peace. Forgiveness as a form of power. In the dim corridors of the mind, forgiveness is often painted in warm light, an act of transcendence, a hand extended across pain, a sacred release. But not all forgiveness is liberation. Sometimes it arrives cloaked in quiet power, not to free, but to reign, not to heal, but to hold. And in the stillness of night, when ego breathes slow and subtle, we must ask, what kind of forgiveness have we given? And what kind have we received? I forgave him, one voice says in the soft dark. Her friend tilts her head. And did it help? She shrugs. It helped me. I felt above it. Above him or above the hurt? She doesn't answer right away. Maybe both. That's the fracture point, where forgiveness shifts from grace to control, when it becomes a crown rather than a balm. Because to say I forgive you is not always a gentle gift. It can carry shadows, expectations, conditions. You owe me now. Or worse, you are less than me, and this proves it. This kind of forgiveness doesn't dissolve guilt. It tattoos it. It becomes a performance of goodness, rehearsed for an invisible audience. An ethical gesture dipped in ego. But true forgiveness? The kind that washes clean? It arrives without an audience. It does not humiliate. It does not declare itself. It asks for nothing in return. It does not demand a confession. It does not trap the other in a cycle of remorse. It's soft, silent. It moves through the body like breath, and then it's gone. Yet in the world of social rituals and ethical facades, we often mistake forgiveness for virtue theater. We forgive loudly. We forgive in front of others. We forgive in ways that still center us, our goodness, our strength, our superiority. And in doing so, we turn something sacred into something strategic. Have you ever used forgiveness to win? The second voice asks, later that night. The first one stares at the ceiling. Maybe. I think I just wanted to feel like the better person. And did you? For a while. She pauses. But it didn't last. Why not? Because I wasn't done being angry. There it is. The paradox. Sometimes we offer forgiveness before we're ready. We hand it out like currency, expecting peace in return. But forgiveness given prematurely or manipulatively leaves residue. Not just for the forgiven, but for the forgiver. Because the soul knows when it's being used as a stage. And so we ask again, softly now, at the edge of sleep. Have you ever forgiven someone not to release them, but to raise yourself? Have you ever said, "It's okay," while secretly hoping they'd still carry the weight? True ethical forgiveness does not need recognition. It does not keep a ledger. It does not bind the other to shame. It dissolves even the identity of wrongdoer. It says, not "I'm better than you," but we are both human, and pain passed through us. Let it pass. Now let that thought exhale, and follow it into the next space, where we ask not what's fair or what's right, but the collapse of deserve, who gets what and why. The world doesn't run on fairness. It hums, quietly and stubbornly, on other rules, momentum, inheritance, chaos. And yet, inside us, a small, stubborn voice repeats the old lullaby. You get what you deserve. That whisper has shaped our childhood lessons, our adult expectations. Be good, work hard, wait your turn. The universe, we were told, is keeping score. But have you noticed? Sometimes the game forgets the rules. Two neighbors cross paths at the mailbox. One smells of overtime and reheated dinners. The other steps out of a gleaming car, wearing the kind of leisure that doesn't need weekends. No crime has been committed. And yet, your mind searches for an answer. Why does one carry the world, while the other is carried by it? The thought flickers. Maybe the first didn't try hard enough. Maybe the second earned it. But quietly, something in you knows that isn't always true. A woman at the laundromat folds shirts while keeping one eye on a sleeping child. She hums to herself, a lullaby made of survival. Across town, another woman browses catalogs of islands she'll never visit, but owns. If you say the word deserve in that moment, it vanishes in your mouth like steam, not from shame, but because the air around it refuses to hold its shape. Deserve is not a law. It's a hope stitched into language, a polite equation we use to make the chaos feel orderly. We say, she deserves better. He doesn't deserve that. But behind those words is a deeper ache. We want the world to be just. And when it isn't, we either rewrite the person's story, or we rewrite the meaning of fairness itself. A man once told me, I used to think I deserved love, until I realized love doesn't visit based on merit. It visits based on moment. He looked down, smiling. And sometimes, it forgets the address entirely. In everyday moments, we enforce this logic without knowing. A barista spills coffee, and someone sighs too loudly. A student fails a test, and we think, they probably didn't try hard enough. But behind those sighs and silent judgments is an attempt to protect ourselves. Because if people suffer for reasons, we can avoid those reasons. But if suffering is random, then it can knock on anyone's door, even ours. Do you think she earned all that? The question was quiet, spoken by a man watching an influencer's yacht drift through his screen. I think she arrived, the woman beside him replied, and someone opened the door. They sat in silence a while, not angry, just quietly rearranged. Maybe the world is less a courtroom, more a weather pattern. Winds blow opportunity toward some, drought toward others. And when we let go of deserve as a compass, we might begin to feel what compassion was always asking us to feel. This could be me. This could be you. This could be anyone. So breathe into that discomfort. Let it be soft, not sharp. When you next see someone falling behind, don't reach first for reasons. Reach for room. Make space in your mind for stories that don't follow rules. Because sometimes, kindness is the only correction we get to offer the universe. And now, as the winds settle, we drift into another quiet contradiction. How patience, so noble, so calm, can sometimes become a velvet curtain we hide behind, instead of stepping through. When patience becomes avoidance. There is something sacred about the word patience. It lands softly on the ear, like the hush of falling leaves or the quiet of dusk. We're taught it's a virtue, a sign of maturity, grace, even wisdom. But what if that stillness we call patience is sometimes a clever disguise for fear? A man sits at the edge of a decision. He tells himself he's waiting for the right moment to speak, to act, to change. Days stretch into weeks. The weeks blend into months. And one evening, as he brushes his teeth in a mirror that barely reflects who he used to be, he whispers to himself, "I'm just being patient." But beneath the surface, something older stirs, a quiet knowing. He isn't waiting out of wisdom. He's avoiding. We often believe we're giving time a chance to work its magic. But time without movement is not healing. It's hiding. Especially when that waiting serves to delay the uncomfortable. A confrontation. A confession. A leap into the unknown. Sometimes, patience is the story we tell ourselves so we don't have to act. Because acting risks rejection, failure, or simply effort. Do you think I should talk to her now? Or give it more time? What are you afraid will happen if you talk to her now? I don't know. Maybe she won't be ready. Or maybe you're the one who isn't ready. This isn't just about relationships. It lives in politics, when injustice demands a response, and leaders respond with endless postponements wrapped in polished words. It lives in self-development, when someone reads, studies, prepares, but never dares to try. It lives in apology, in forgiveness, in creativity, in love. We wait and call it wisdom. But wisdom moves, quietly maybe, but it moves. True patience isn't passive. It watches with open eyes. It breathes through discomfort. It has a pulse. And when the time arrives, it does not retreat. It's the kind of waiting that readies the heart, not numbs it. Think of the river. It seems still. But below the surface, it's always moving, gathering energy, changing the earth it touches. Patience should be like that. Subtle, yet alive. There is a kind of patience that comforts, and another that corrodes. The former brings clarity. The latter brings moss to the soul, because when waiting becomes indefinite, it turns into a quiet decay. Stagnation isn't peace. It's slow death in disguise. Remember when you said you were going to write that book? Yeah, I'm still waiting for the right inspiration. Or maybe you're waiting for the fear to disappear. Maybe both. Then neither will come. Inspiration visits those already in motion. So tonight, if there's a corner of your life that's paused under the name of patience, shine a light there. Ask gently, am I truly waiting? Or am I afraid? Because real patience doesn't tremble. It rests, but only to rise. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop waiting. As the mind begins to loosen its grip, drifting deeper into the soft shadows of sleep, let this question settle beneath your breath. What am I postponing under the mask of peace? Now, from the soft veil of avoidance, we move into something even quieter and far more complex, the ethics of silence, especially when the world is crying out. The ethics of silence in a screaming world. There is a kind of silence that soothes, a hush like fresh snow resting on the earth, a breath held not out of fear but reverence. But not all silence is sacred. In a world that burns with inequality, cruelty, and distortion, silence can become something else entirely. A mask, a retreat, a permission slip written in invisible ink. Late one night, two strangers sit across from each other in a dimly lit train car. One reads, the other stares at the window. The reader looks up and asks gently, "Do you ever feel guilty for not saying anything?" The window gazer exhales slowly, tracing the fog on the glass. All the time. But I also feel scared of saying the wrong thing. That tension, that trembling tightrope between wanting to protect peace and fearing the price of speaking, is where this dilemma lives. Because silence, though often mistaken for neutrality, always tilts. In a moment of injustice, when someone says nothing, they do not stay still. They drift quietly to the side of power. It's subtle. A friend lets a cruel comment pass at dinner. A coworker overlooks a lie that hurts someone else. And you nod or smile or sip your drink. No harm done, you tell yourself. But the truth is, the absence of a word does not erase the weight of its absence. Ethics is not just about what we don't do. It's about what we allow to happen without resistance. And silence, especially when it costs nothing to speak, is often not wisdom, but convenience wrapped in soft excuses. It feels safe in the moment, but over time, safety can erode integrity like waves smoothing stone, slowly, invisibly, and completely. A woman at a coffee shop once turned to the man behind her in line. He was staring down at his phone, visibly upset. She said, "Are you okay?" 3 small words. He didn't answer right away, but his breath steadied. Later, he said it was the only kindness he remembered from that entire week. Words are not weapons, they are bridges. And sometimes, the most ethical act is not grand protest or sweeping statement. It's simply the refusal to disappear when presence matters. Now, take a moment and ask, not as punishment, but as invitation. Has there been a time you stayed silent? Not because it was right, but because it was easier? Let that question soften as the night grows quieter. No guilt, just space. Just breathe. You are allowed to rest now. And when you return, whenever that is, you'll know your voice is still yours. Waiting. Ready. Up next, the hero's shadow. How ideals, when held too tightly, can turn into the very harm they once resisted. The hero who becomes the tyrant. It begins with light. A figure rises, eyes lit by purpose, hands clenched not in anger, but in resolve. The hero steps forward, not for glory, but to undo injustice. And at first, the world cheers. The chains fall. The old order trembles. Hope is reborn. But time stretches, and something changes, not all at once, and never with fanfare. The hero stays too long at the podium. Decisions grow sharper. What was once consultation becomes command. The urgency of justice gives way to the efficiency of control. The very systems that were once toppled are quietly rebuilt, only this time with the hero's name engraved into their foundations. "Isn't this what we fought for?" they whisper. "No," someone says. "It was never meant to be about you." History doesn't lack for these echoes. The liberator who couldn't surrender the crown, the revolutionary who silenced dissent, the freedom fighter who became the warden. Each believed in some way that they had to stay, that no one else could carry the flame, that their vision was too vital to risk delegation. Power, even in noble hands, is seductive. It creeps not with fanfare, but with necessity. Decisions made just this once become habits. Principles are bent for the greater good, and slowly, the mission, the pure, trembling dream that launched it all, becomes a mirror, not of the people, but of the self. In the stillness of night, when the world sleeps and no crowds remain to cheer, some heroes feel it, that quiet grief, the recognition that they no longer remember where the line was drawn, or when they crossed it. A soft voice breaks the silence. Do you think he knew? Knew what? That he'd become the thing he used to fight? I don't know. Maybe he thought he was still fighting. True ethical leadership, like true love, is willing to let go, to hand over the sword, to become irrelevant. Because the goal was never the role. The goal was always the world. But not all heroes remember that. Some stay because they're afraid. Others because they're convinced no one else can do it. And the longer they hold on, the more the air thickens. What began as revolution sours into regime. You can almost hear the whisper, the ends justify the means. But what if the ends were never meant to be in your hands forever? Pause here. Has there been something you once served, once protected, that slowly became something you needed to possess? As the fog of power settles, we now widen the frame. What happens when a hero's freedom starts to cost everyone else theirs? We turn from the individual flame to the collective cost. The next question unfolds, not from power held too long, but from liberty stretched too far. Freedom's hidden cost on the collective. You step outside on a warm evening. The street is quiet, and the air smells faintly of jasmine and rain on concrete. A breeze passes, light, easy, and for a moment everything feels free. But then, a car alarm breaks the stillness. A neighbor's window slams. A dog barks in reaction. And just like that, your freedom to savor the silence is rewritten by someone else's freedom to live loudly. Freedom is one of the most beautiful words we carry. It feels noble, airy, almost holy. But like all beautiful things, it casts a shadow. Every step you take ripples outward. Every choice you make redraws someone else's space. A man lights a cigarette outside a bookstore. He stands apart, but the smoke travels. A child nearby coughs. A mother adjusts her scarf. The bookseller closes the door. No one yells, no one blames, but the freedom of one reshaped the comfort of many. I didn't mean to bother anyone, he murmurs, mostly to himself. You didn't, the bookseller replies gently. But it still did. This is not about guilt or blame. It's about the invisible threads that connect us. You speak freely, but the sound becomes someone else's background. You drive fast, but the wind you stir pulls dust into another's eyes. Liberty is not clean. It is not untouched. It is soaked in unseen negotiations. In Western tales, the hero rides alone. In the stories we whisper to ourselves, freedom is solitary. But that's only one half of the truth. Real freedom is always entangled, with strangers, with neighbors, with those who never even learn your name. And that entanglement? It's not a problem. It's the price. Not punishment, not burden. Just the quiet math of shared space. There's a young woman sitting at the back of a cafe. She places her laptop on the only outlet table. A man walks over and smiles, asking, "Hey, would you mind switching spots?" I've got 10% left and a deadline. She hesitates. She has the right to say no, but in that moment, she weighs not just what's allowed, but what's kind. Freedom without awareness becomes a blindfold, a dance where no one hears the music together. But freedom with consciousness? That's choreography. That's grace. So the question isn't just, what can I do? It's softer than that. It's quieter. What might happen if I do? And deeper still, what do I owe simply because I exist alongside others? Ethics lives here, not in law, not in ideology, but in the pause before action, in the awareness that your breath may brush against another's silence, that your rhythm may cross their rest, that what you want may come at a cost unseen. And now, the thought lingers like the echo of footsteps in a shared hallway. Has your freedom ever cast a longer shadow than you meant? Let that settle. Breathe into it. There's no rush to resolve it. And as your body softens into the fabric of sleep, we turn to a question closer still. What if even consent, the sacred yes, is more layered than we think? Is consent ever truly free? In the quiet moments before sleep, the word consent drifts across the mind like a feather, gentle, almost weightless. We're taught to trust it, to believe that if someone says yes, that yes is sacred, complete, and unassailable. But under the soft surface of that syllable lies a question far less peaceful. Is consent always real? Or is it sometimes a survival instinct dressed in politeness? Do you want to work this weekend? Sure, she says, with a smile that hides her fatigue, because the bills are stacked like bricks behind her eyes. Are you okay with this? I guess, he replies, staring past the question to the silence that might follow a refusal. Two friends sit on a bench in the dusk of a long day. Why didn't you just say no? One asks, the other shrugs. Because I didn't feel like I could. That's not the same as saying yes. I know, but I didn't want to deal with the fallout. Consent, in theory, is a contract between equals, but in practice, the scale often tilts. Sometimes, it's not a choice. It's the lesser punishment, the quieter fight, the quickest way to get through the moment without breaking everything. We assume consent means comfort, confidence, clarity. But what if it just means compliance? In workplaces, relationships, even friendships, people say yes to things they do not want. Not because they're weak, but because they're calculating. Because the cost of refusal is heavier than the weight of agreement. Because no one ever taught them that no doesn't have to come with consequences. Pause and feel that. Have you ever whispered yes with a voice that didn't feel like yours? Have you nodded to keep the peace, to buy time, to avoid disappointing someone who held more power than they should? Ethical behavior isn't just about hearing yes. It's about seeing the truth behind it. It's about recognizing how power changes language, how fear turns requests into demands even when no threats are spoken aloud. It's about asking, would they have said yes if they were truly free to say no? And deeper still, it's about questioning yourself. When you ask something of someone, do they feel safe enough to say no? Do they feel equal enough to hesitate? Do they believe they can walk away? The absence of resistance does not equal the presence of desire. Just as silence is not always peace, consent is not always freedom. And sometimes, the most ethical act is not getting an answer. It's creating the conditions where the answer can be honest. Now breathe. Let that idea drift through you like mist. And as the night deepens, we descend further into the realm of guilt, a feeling we often wear like a badge. when perhaps it's just another form of self-punishment disguised as virtue. The guilt that sanctifies suffering. It begins softly, a dull ache somewhere behind the ribs, not sharp enough to scream, not loud enough to name, just persistent. Somewhere in the quiet hours, long after apologies are forgotten by everyone else, it lingers. Guilt. Not the kind that calls for action, but the kind that wraps around your spine like a weighted scarf. You carry it not because you must, but because you've grown used to the warmth of its weight. There are those who don't seek to be forgiven. They seek to suffer. Because somewhere along the way, they learned that guilt feels like redemption. That if you hurt just the right amount, it must mean you're good again. That if no one else punishes you, you must punish yourself. A gentle voice echoes in an empty train station. Do you want to be forgiven? A pause. No. I want to deserve it. But forgiveness isn't something we earn with pain. And guilt, though it may feel noble, can become a habit, a ritual. You replay the scene again and again, as if each repetition scrubs the memory clean. But nothing ever changes, except how deep the grooves are carved into your mind. There's a strange comfort in guilt. It feels busy, like you're doing something. Feeling bad becomes its own kind of productivity, a moral currency you keep spending, hoping it makes the past cheaper. But here's the quiet truth. Guilt is not virtue, it's a signal, a light blinking on the dashboard of the soul. And if you sit staring at it too long without moving, you miss the point. You forget that its job was to redirect, not to define. Two people crossing a quiet street after dusk. Why do you still think about it? I don't know. Maybe because if I stop, it's like saying it didn't matter. And what if letting go is how it matters most? The most courageous choice isn't always to carry the weight. It's knowing when to set it down. Because ethics, real ethics, is rooted in choice, not in punishment, not in looping pain, but in what you choose next. Guilt can feel like a mirror, but sometimes it's a mask, one that tells us we're being good, when really, we're just afraid to move on. Let that settle. Breathe. Is there a guilt you've kept longer than it served you? One you clung to, not out of integrity, but out of habit? And as we ease away from the private rituals of self-punishment, the path turns outward, into halls of obedience, uniforms, and quiet rationalizations. The next question whispers in the dark. What happens when morality hides behind the phrase, "I was just doing my job"? I was just following orders. Obedience versus ethics. The phrase is chilling in its simplicity. I was just following orders. It echoes down through history like a mechanical breath, calm, practiced, horrifying. Spoken by soldiers at tribunals, by bureaucrats in courtrooms, by scientists in labs. And yet, it always points in the same direction, away from responsibility, toward a structure, a command, a name above their own. Obedience is not evil. In fact, it often feels virtuous. It's the oil in the gears of family, school, society. It teaches us to respect structure, to defer, to trust. There's even comfort in it, a soft surrender of doubt. Someone else will decide. In a world of chaos, to follow an order can feel like choosing safety, but ethics doesn't live in comfort. It lives in friction. Should I? That's the ethical voice, not loud, but persistent. A murmur in the back of the mind, especially when the command sounds too firm, too cold, too final. Obedience becomes dangerous the moment it drowns that whisper. When conscience bows not out of agreement, but out of habit. A young worker is told to fire someone unfairly. A medical assistant is instructed to rush a procedure that feels unsafe. A soldier is commanded to press forward, knowing civilians are in the line of fire. Each may obey. Each may convince themselves, it's not up to me. But deep down, they know. Ethics was waiting for them, and they walked past it. Would you have disobeyed? I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, it's hard, right? What if it's your job on the line? Exactly. That's the trap. The cost of saying no becomes the excuse for saying yes. Ethics demands disobedience sometimes, not rebellion for the sake of pride, but resistance in the name of humanity. It asks us to become uncomfortable, to lose face, to break rank. Because what is moral courage if not the willingness to say, I won't? It's not easy. Systems are powerful. Uniforms, job titles, routines, they all blur the boundary between choice and command. But the truth is, every action is still yours. The order may come from above. The result may serve a cause. But the hand, the voice, the silence, that belongs to you. Take a quiet moment. Remember a time when you said yes, not out of conviction, but out of fear. Not out of belief, but out of routine. What would have changed if you'd paused? If you'd asked, is this right? Maybe you don't need an answer. Maybe you just need to start hearing that question again. And now, with that question lingering, we turn our gaze to something else, a structure designed to uphold justice. But even the law, when too rigid or too blind, can betray its promise. What happens when the code meant to protect becomes the instrument of harm? The lawful evil, when rules protect injustice. There's something oddly comforting about following the rules, a kind of quiet relief, like tracing lines on a map and believing they were drawn with good intent. Laws, after all, carry the weight of authority, of structure. But what if the structure is hollow? What if the lines are carved to protect not fairness, but comfort for a few, silence for the many? You see, some of the most brutal chapters of our shared history were not chaos. They were order. They wore uniforms, signatures, official stamps. Slavery did not hide in the shadows. It thrived in courtrooms. Apartheid was not a crime in its time. It was the law. And in those eras, those who resisted weren't seen as brave. They were labeled criminals. In the hush of a nearly empty cafe, two strangers share a moment near the window. One stirs their drink slowly, speaking almost to the spoon more than the person beside them. Did you know, they murmur, that in some places, kindness used to be illegal? The other looks up. You mean, like helping someone you weren't supposed to? A nod. Or loving someone you weren't allowed to? The law called it disorder. A pause. The clink of glass. Then the quiet question that neither one dares to fully answer. And what would we have done if we lived then? The trouble is, when something is written into law, it takes on the tone of truth. We stop asking. We defer. We obey. And sometimes we call obedience virtue, even when it means betraying the vulnerable. Morality becomes procedural, the heart outsourced. But conscience does not clock in and out with legal codes. It stirs at night. It asks when no one else will. It pulls at the hem of our silence and whispers, just because it's allowed doesn't mean it's right. A teacher once closed her classroom door and taught what the government forbade. A nurse once crossed a barricade to deliver medicine. A clerk once forged a name to save a life. None of them were lawful. All of them were just. Because there comes a time when to stay inside the law is to abandon what makes us human. to preserve your status, your job, your ease, at the cost of your integrity. And that price, quietly paid, echoes long after the moment passes. In the middle of an airport queue, a small conversation breaks out between a traveler and the agent who scans tickets. "That rule's outdated," the traveler says with a soft smile. "It doesn't protect anyone anymore." The agent hesitates, eyes flicking toward a supervisor, then gently replies, "Yeah, I know. I need this job." A few heartbeats pass. "I get it," the traveler says, and both return to silence, but not the same silence they had before. Rules can be necessary, but they are not sacred. And ethical maturity begins when we stop treating them like commandments and start seeing them as questions. When we choose not just what keeps us safe, but what keeps us awake. Let your mind rest now. Float in that space between structure and soul. Drift into a softness that knows justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it walks barefoot. Sometimes it knocks quietly, hoping someone will answer. And in the next breath, we step closer to truth. Not the grand truth of laws or proclamations, but the personal truth that trembles on the edge of being spoken. Should it always be told? Or does silence sometimes serve a deeper kind of care? Close your eyes. Let that question hum like a low wind. We'll meet it soon, gently, just beyond this pause. The kind lie versus the brutal truth. There's a particular silence that falls when someone asks a question they may not truly want answered. A silence heavy not with ignorance, but with awareness of the fragile place between mercy and truth. Picture the scene. An old man in a hospital bed, voice quivering, eyes searching yours. "Am I going to get better?" You hold his hand. You could say, "No." You could list the charts, the scans, the shadows inside his body. But instead you whisper softly, "You're doing great. Just rest." And in that moment, truth feels like violence, while the lie wraps itself in love. Truth is sacred, yes. But not all truths bloom in every season. Some need gentler ground, warmer light. The brutal truth, when flung like a stone, may crack something in the soul that never quite heals. And yet, too many kind lies strung together begin to form a net, not to catch someone when they fall, but to trap them in illusion. "Do you think he ever loved me?" a friend asks over coffee after months of silence from someone who left without explanation. You hesitate. You know the answer, but your pause is long, not because you're unsure of the facts, but because you're unsure of what your honesty might shatter. In the dim kitchen light, two voices murmur from opposite ends of a late-night phone call. Should I tell her what really happened? I don't know. Do you want to protect her, or are you just avoiding the fallout? Maybe both. Maybe I'm not brave enough to hurt her, even if it's the truth. This is the fault line, not between right and wrong, but between comfort and consequence. Because a kind lie, when given without careful reflection, can become its own form of cruelty, one that controls rather than consoles. It steals the chance for someone else to decide, to grieve on their own terms, to grow from the hard soil of reality. Intent becomes the compass. Are you lying to protect them, or to shield yourself from the discomfort of their reaction? One is compassion. The other is cowardice in a mask of kindness. And yet, there are moments when even that line blurs. A mother telling her young son that daddy left for work, not for good. A doctor saying, "We're doing everything we can," instead of naming what's already known in the deepest part of the heart. Sometimes, a kind lie is the only thread holding someone together long enough to make it through the night. But here's the truth. No answer, no silence, no sentence is ever fully clean. There is always cost, whether it's the wound of truth or the wound of not knowing. So close your eyes now and revisit this question. When was the last time you withheld the truth and told yourself it was mercy? And what lives in that space? Regret, relief, or something far more complicated? As the mind drifts further into thought, we turn inward once again, away from lies and towards selfless acts. But even there, in the realm of altruism, a new question quietly stirs. Is any good deed truly free of the self? Altruism's selfish shadow. A soft voice in the dark says, "You're so generous. You always think of others." And for a moment, it wraps around you like a warm blanket, this quiet admiration. But somewhere inside, something small stirs. Not guilt, not shame, just awareness. There's a comfort in being kind, a reward not spoken out loud. It feels good to be seen as selfless, to be the helper, the giver, the one who shows up when no one else does. And so we do it again, and again, and again. Altruism, we call it, the noblest virtue, doing good without expecting anything in return. But deep beneath that word, almost imperceptible, lies a whisper of want, a longing not for thanks, but for meaning, for identity. One person leans over to another on the train, offering a spare umbrella as the rain begins to fall. "That's kind of you," the stranger says, surprised. The other just smiles. It's nothing. But the glow on their face suggests otherwise. Does this make the act impure? Not at all. It makes it human. The desire to be of use is stitched into us. Evolution taught us to cooperate, to bond, to survive by helping each other. Even kindness, then, carries a scent of survival. What matters is not cleansing the self out of service, but recognizing it. Because when we deny the shadow, it grows teeth. Somewhere, someone stays up all night helping a friend through heartbreak, not just out of love, but because being the strong one gives them purpose. Someone else volunteers every weekend because they fear what stillness might reveal if they stopped. Another gives and gives and gives until the giving becomes a quiet transaction. Now you need me, right? A gentle voice over coffee asks, "Do you ever wonder if you're helping them or helping the version of yourself you want to believe in?" The reply comes with a pause, like a pebble sinking into still water. Sometimes both. But maybe that's okay. It is okay, because ethics doesn't ask us to be saints. It doesn't punish the presence of ego. It only asks us not to let ego steer the ship. Service becomes dangerous when it crosses a line, from compassion to control, from caring to craving praise. The martyr who never rests, the helper who quietly resents being needed, the giver who can't say no. These are not failures of kindness, but failures of awareness. So tonight, let go of the burden to be perfect in your goodness. Let your kindness be honest, not spotless, but sincere. And if, beneath your gift, there's a hope to be seen, held, appreciated, breathe with it, acknowledge it. That too is a kind of intimacy with the self. As you drift further into the folds of sleep, we move next into a gentler tension, apologies, and how even the words "I'm sorry" can carry power, sometimes healing, sometimes control. Let's follow the current there, softly. When apologies are a tool of control, it begins softly, as most traps do. A sigh, a lowered gaze, and the familiar rhythm of regret. "I'm sorry." It seems humble, gentle even, a balm offered in the shape of words. But listen longer, feel what follows. Sometimes the apology is not a bridge, but a leash. In its purest form, an apology is an act of humility, an offering of vulnerability that opens the door to healing. But in the wrong hands, it becomes a polished tool, an emotional screwdriver used to tighten one's grip on the narrative. I already said I was sorry, they say, as if apology erases harm, as if the performance of remorse should instantly buy back your silence, your comfort, your forgiveness. Do you really have to keep bringing this up? That's what Mia asked her friend Sam after a long, awkward silence. I said sorry 3 times, she continued, arms folded, voice sharper now. But I'm still hurting, Sam whispered. It's not about how many times you say it. The air between them, heavy now, was no longer about the wound. It was about the demand that the wound be dismissed. Apologies can be loaded with subtle coercion, offered not to comfort the person hurt, but to protect the person who did the hurting. A curtain pulled quickly across an unfinished play. Let's move on, they suggest, before the dust even settles. Sometimes, an apology isn't about reconciliation at all. It's about reputation management, about optics, about avoiding the consequences that honesty might demand. And what of the apologies that insist on forgiveness, that crowd the hurt person into a corner, murmuring, I said I'm sorry. What more do you want? As if the words themselves were a receipt, and your continued pain, a form of bad customer service. True apology doesn't rush. It doesn't ask for reassurance or try to hurry forgiveness along like a checklist. It doesn't turn the spotlight back onto the one who caused the harm, demanding praise for their remorse. A real apology is quiet, not passive, but patient. It asks, how did this affect you? Instead of saying, can we be done now? I'm sorry, James said, eyes fixed on the floor. You've said that before, Nina replied, but you keep doing the same thing. This time is different, he insisted. It only is, she answered, if your actions change. Not just your words. There's a difference between apology and accountability. The former is speech, the latter is change. When we mistake one for the other, we enter a cycle where pain becomes a stage and sorrow becomes performance. So breathe for a moment. Think of the last time someone apologized to you. Did it feel like a relief or a rehearsal? And as we drift further into this quiet reflection, let us now move from the theater of remorse to the privilege of morality itself, how we choose our ethical stance, when the cost of choosing is light. The ethics of privilege in choosing morality. You're standing in a grocery aisle. Fluorescent lights hum above. One person reads every label, selecting cage-free, fair trade, locally grown. A few feet away, someone else grabs the cheapest instant noodles and doesn't look back. Not because they don't care, because caring costs. There's a softness we often forget. Not every choice is a choice. A warm voice passes through the night. I skipped lunch today, one man mutters as he reaches for the day-old bread. The woman next to him replies, I know. I told myself I'd start eating clean, but right now, clean just means full. The conversation floats like breath on glass, fleeting, fogged with something more than hunger. That's the difference no one talks about. One person has the room to debate morality. The other is too busy surviving it. It feels comforting to think ethics are universal, but not everyone has the luxury to ponder whether the chicken suffered or the brand supported a cause. Some can pause before every purchase, every act, considering its ripple. Others live moment to moment, not because they lack a conscience, but because they don't have the cushion. Privilege can sound like silence, the silence of never having to choose between the right thing and the necessary thing. At a quiet bus stop, someone pulls their coat tighter, as the wind threads its fingers into the seams. Another speaks softly. I didn't report it. I couldn't. Rent's due next week. And the first just nods, eyes heavy. Doing the right thing, they say, can feel like drowning when you've already been holding your breath. Ethical frameworks that ignore context turn cold. They pretend that everyone plays the same game with the same cards. But ethics without empathy becomes performance, and judgment without knowledge becomes cruelty. When you ask, why didn't they just leave? When you wonder, why didn't they speak up? Pause and ask instead, what did it cost them to stay silent? And what would it have cost them to speak? The line between moral and immoral isn't always drawn in ink. Sometimes it's drawn in hunger, in desperation, in fear. It's easy to weigh right and wrong when your world is padded with options, when your shoes aren't worn down by survival. Tonight, as you let your thoughts drift, let go of the harsh ruler. Not everything can be measured. Not every story fits the script of should have. Let it soften you. The idea that goodness sometimes shows up, not in perfection, but in persistence. Not in grand gestures, but in enduring without turning cruel. A dim street lamp flickers. Someone helps an old man across the street, even though they're late. No one notices. But not all goodness asks to be seen. We float now, gently, into the next question, into the shadow of something sharp and cold, shame, and how it too can betray the very ethics it claims to protect. Shame as a social weapon. Shame, at its best, was meant to be a quiet whisper from our conscience, a signal that we've drifted from the path of integrity. But somewhere along the way, it was taken from the realm of introspection and handed to the crowd. And in that crowd, it became something else entirely, a weapon. Did you see what they posted? Yeah, everyone's talking about it. Honestly, they had it coming. But did they? I don't even know the full story. Does it matter anymore? This is the age of instant judgment, where shame no longer unfolds in private reflection, but erupts in public spectacle, where a single mistake, sometimes misunderstood, can become a permanent brand. The digital square is loud, and when we cast someone into it, it's rarely about helping them grow. It's about watching them burn. Communities have always used shame to shape behavior. It sets limits. It protects norms. But shame without compassion becomes cruelty with a purpose. We say it's about justice, but often it's about control. We say it's for accountability, but deep down, it can be about feeling powerful by pointing at someone weaker. And unlike guilt, which often turns inward and asks, "What did I do wrong?" Shame screams, "You are wrong." It defines identity, not behavior. Once someone is marked with shame, it sticks, even if they change, even if they apologize. Because now, we're not talking about what they did. We're talking about who they are. On social media, shame is viral. Context is a casualty. Nuance gets lost between clicks and retweets. The world sees a snapshot, judges the whole life, and moves on to the next target. It's faster than justice, and far less forgiving. Do you think they deserved all that? I don't know, but everyone was piling on. It just felt normal. But since when is destruction normal? We've mistaken outrage for virtue, forgetting that punishment without understanding is not ethics. It's vengeance dressed in moral clothing. When shame becomes a performance, it no longer invites growth. It silences, it isolates, it erodes the soul until what remains is not reflection, but survival. The true ethical function of shame, if there is one, must be rooted in care, It must aim for healing, not harm. But more often than not, we turn it into a spectacle, and the line between correction and condemnation disappears. Close your eyes. Remember a time you saw someone dragged into the public square of opinion. Did you ask why? Did you pause to wonder what they felt when the world turned against them? Or did you scroll past, silently complicit in the cruelty? Let's breathe here and listen to the silence left behind by a voice we might have helped silence. As we leave the wreckage of shame behind, we now step into another paradox. What happens when noble intentions, meant to help, meant to heal, become the very force that causes harm? The good intentions that start wars. There's a strange quiet just before the chaos begins, not in the streets or skies, but in the mind. A moment when certainty blooms, when someone says, "We must do this, it's the right thing," and they believe it, deeply, sincerely. That belief walks like a soldier, upright, purposeful, sure of its direction. But where it steps, the earth breaks open. Some of history's darkest storms were born in sunlit rooms filled with noble intentions. Liberty, justice, defense of the innocent. The words shine like polished metals, heavy with pride. But when those words are stitched onto flags and carried into battle, something shifts. Because even the purest idea becomes dangerous when it refuses to look at its own shadow. Do you think they knew it would end like that? One voice asks gently, stirring the quiet. Maybe they thought the cost was worth it. Another replies, eyes half closed. Or maybe they stopped seeing the cost at all. Wars to spread democracy. Bombs dropped in the name of peace. Walls built for safety, tearing homes in half. These contradictions don't scream, they whisper. They whisper through speeches and headlines, soft enough to lull entire nations to sleep. Until a town burns. Until a child loses both parents. Until the promise of salvation turns to smoke and ash. Good intentions don't cleanse blood. A righteous cause, once weaponized, forgets to ask who is harmed on its path to justice. And the strange thing is, most people don't set out to hurt. They set out to help. But help, forced through fear, filtered through pride, twisted by power, becomes harm, wearing the mask of hope. In a soft-lit cafe, two strangers sit across from each other. One stirs their tea without looking up. "I just thought I was doing the right thing," they say quietly. The other leans forward. "And now?" A pause. "Now I wonder if I ever asked who would pay for it." The mind wants tidy answers. That's what makes sleep so different. Sleep has no sides, no righteousness. It doesn't need to win. So as you drift now, know that it's okay not to solve this paradox. Let it settle. Let it breathe beside you like a question with no demand for reply. Ethics doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with doubt, with the courage to ask not just why we fight, but how, and who gets left behind. Let your breath slow. You're not meant to carry every war story in your chest, because next, we step onto another field, one that looks calm on the surface, a place where peace itself may conceal a quiet betrayal, where stillness might cost more than we realize. Stay with me. We'll go there gently. When peace requires complicity. Sometimes what we call peace is just the quiet hum of fear, a room where no one raises their voice, not because there's nothing to say, but because saying it might cost too much. The air feels still, but not serene. It's thick, pressurized. And beneath that calm surface, something is being buried. "Why didn't you speak up?" she asks, stirring the coffee slowly. He doesn't look up. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything." it would have just made things worse. That moment lingers between them, not with anger, but a tired understanding. They've both been there, at a family dinner where someone said something cruel, and everyone pretended not to hear. At work, when a colleague was mistreated, but saying anything meant risking your job. In a friendship where honesty would rupture the fragile balance they've spent years preserving. We're taught that peace is good, that calm is better than chaos. But there's a version of peace that comes at too high a cost, the kind that demands your silence when you should speak, your stillness when someone else is being pushed to the edge. There's a name for that cost: complicity. Ethics doesn't ask us to choose between peace and justice. It asks us to question what our peace is built on. If the absence of conflict means tolerating harm, is it really peace? Or is it just a beautifully disguised form of control? A workplace where no one dares challenge leadership may look peaceful, but beneath it, fear runs the show. A family that never argues may appear united, but often at the expense of one member swallowing their voice again and again. A community that doesn't confront its prejudice may look harmonious, but only because the marginalized have learned to keep their heads down. He finally speaks. I thought I was keeping things steady, but maybe I was just helping the problem stay hidden. She nods. Sometimes being quiet feels safer, but later you wonder, what did I help protect? And who did I leave behind? True peace isn't passive. It requires courage, the kind that disrupts when necessary, the kind that faces discomfort, not to create conflict, but to allow healing to begin. Peace isn't the absence of tension, it's the presence of truth. Let your mind rest here for a moment. Imagine a place where peace and justice meet, not through avoidance, but through brave, gentle honesty. Not a forced silence, but a deep exhale. And as we leave this reflection, we turn now to something older, something slower, a forgotten wisdom that doesn't shout but listens, a wisdom that begins not in arguments, but in stillness. The ethical code of animals, and what we forgot. There's something older than language, older than temples or treaties. Before we carved morality into stone, before we taught it in classrooms or whispered it in prayers, there was instinct. A silent understanding passed down not through doctrine, but through breath, blood, and gesture. Somewhere on a quiet stretch of grassland, a lioness rests beside her cub, though she's hungry. Nearby, wolves take turns at a carcass, not by rank, but by need. In the deep ocean, a whale sings for days after its mate has gone. These are not anomalies. They are patterns, ancient rhythms of care that never needed to be explained. And maybe that's the point. I thought ethics were rules, someone once said to me while feeding stray cats behind a closed bookstore. But this just feels right. The pause between their words carried more truth than any definition. We've built entire systems to regulate what animals seem to know by heart. Elephants pause where their dead once lay. Bonobos reconcile not by force, but with touch. There's no law that tells them to do this. No reward, no surveillance. Only a pulse of recognition, the other matters. But somewhere along our ascent, we grew enamored with complexity. We turned kindness into policy, compassion into performance. And in the process, perhaps we overran something simple and sacred. What if we didn't outgrow morality? What if we buried it? A child once asked, "Do dogs feel guilt?" The mother replied softly, "Maybe not the kind we do, but they know when they've hurt someone they love." It wasn't science, it was observation, honest, direct, almost painful in its clarity. Think now of the last time you did something kind without planning it. No internal debate, no mental checklist, just a gesture, fluid, quiet, natural. The kind that comes before thought, before permission, before pride. That's the current we swam in long ago, the ethical river of life itself, not built from commandments, but from breath shared under stars and warmth offered in the cold. Two strangers once shared a bench in a park at dusk. One handed over half a sandwich without a word. The other nodded, took a bite, and said, "I didn't know I needed this." It wasn't about food. It was about being seen. The animals still see one another, still listen without words, still offer without debt. In their simplicity, there is no performance, no applause, only presence. Perhaps our minds, so busy building codes and creeds, have forgotten what our bodies always knew. That empathy doesn't need a reason. That compassion precedes cognition. That love is not earned, it's felt. So now, as the room softens and the weight of the day recedes, rest with this thought gently perched beside you. Not all wisdom needs to be spoken. Some truths live in fur and feather, in breath and bone, and in remembering them, we remember ourselves. As your breathing deepens, we turn to what comes next. From the grace of animals, we step into the gravity of duty and ask, what happens when fulfilling your role begins to erase who you are? The duty that erases the self. It begins so gently you barely notice. A promise here, a responsibility there, a sense of purpose so strong it almost feels like love. Duty, in its early bloom, offers stability, structure, meaning. You wake with a reason. You move with intent. You are needed. But what happens when that duty becomes all you are? Imagine a soldier, boots polished, spine straight, not from pride, but from repetition. Orders given, followed, never questioned. Each command is a thread woven tightly through the self until there is no seam left to open, no gap through which a question might breathe. Or a parent, eyes tired, hands full, so absorbed in care that their own reflection becomes unfamiliar. Or an employee whose life blends into the company's hours, the brand's language, the mission's goals, until weekends feel strange and silence feels like failure. There's a strange kind of applause that follows such devotion. People call it noble. They say things like selfless or heroic, but behind every compliment is a missing name, not the role, not the title, the name. Who were you before this began, and where did that person go? Do you ever feel like you're performing your life? I don't know. I just do what needs to be done. Isn't that enough? It is. But do you miss yourself? Duty has a weight that doesn't shout. It leans. Quietly. Daily. And over time, your shoulders stoop not from weakness, but from the pressure of a role too tightly worn. It begins to feel easier to stay in the mask than to lift it. After all, people count on you. You're the one who never breaks, the one who holds the line. But holding that line, always, might mean never crossing it to meet your own needs. Ethics is often framed as doing the right thing, but there's a deeper layer, the question of who is doing it. When your actions reflect only what's expected and never what's felt, the goodness can start to ring hollow. Because without selfhood, duty risks becoming performance, and performance, if endless, becomes erasure. Can devotion to a role be so deep that it becomes a kind of abandonment, not of others, but of yourself? Pause. Let this thought settle in your chest like a feather. You are not only what you do for others, and your value isn't defined solely by what you fulfill. There is a quiet violence in losing yourself in service, a wound dressed up in medals and praise, and yet, this wound is not irreparable. Let your breath return to its own rhythm now. Let the roll loosen. Let the mask warm in your hands instead of on your face. You were someone before the duty. You are still that person, underneath the doing. And as we drift further into reflection, we turn now towards something even deeper than duty, something that wears its own mask, love. Love that, when stretched too far, can justify almost anything, even the abandonment of one's truth. When love justifies anything, there's a quiet rustle in the mind when the word love is spoken, a softening, a leaning inward. It carries warmth, yes, but also a strange permission. Love, we say, can do anything. Move mountains, cross oceans, heal wounds. But what happens when it becomes the reason behind harm, the excuse for control, the silence after cruelty? Two people stand beneath a flickering street lamp. One reaches out gently, saying, "You know I only did it because I care." And the other, tired but unsure, nods, because the words feel right, even if the action didn't. That's the strange thing about love. It's rarely questioned, especially when it comes wrapped in the right tone. The comforting touch, the old story that says, "I'm doing this for your sake." A parent disciplines a child with trembling hands. A partner checks messages, not to dominate, but just to make sure everything's okay. A nation draws borders in the name of protection, but in that comforting haze, something essential slips away. Discernment, the ability to ask, softly but clearly, is this love or fear disguised as love? There's a difference between holding and gripping, between shelter and cage, and often it's not what we say, it's the silence afterward, the things we no longer allow to be named. Real love invites breath, invites freedom. It does not pull the strings tighter when afraid. A woman leans over her tea in a dim cafe. Her friend speaks softly. "You think he does all that just because he loves you?" There's a pause, a long sip. "I used to, but now I'm not sure. Maybe it's more about not wanting to lose me than wanting me to be okay." And that's where ethics nest quietly inside the heart, not judging the love itself, but asking what that love is allowed to excuse, whether your care still has room for the other person's truth, or whether it has started to build a world where only your version of safety survives. It's not an accusation. It's a candle in a dark hallway. Ethics doesn't yell. It doesn't rip the mask away. It whispers, "Wait, look closer. Whose needs are being served here?" Even in the gentlest homes, even in the kindest relationships, the lines blur. And when they do, love can become a lovely word painted over a locked door. So rest here, for a breath. Let this question drift through you like incense. Have I ever excused what I wouldn't tolerate, just because I loved them, or feared losing them, or wanted them to stay? It's all right if the answer isn't clear. It rarely is in the moment. That's why we return to these questions softly at night, when the mind lets go and the heart finally speaks without armor. Now the breath slows, a hush deepens, and we step from the warmth of personal love into the colder realm of moral abstraction. A question that echoes in governments, hospitals, and history books. What if the greater good slowly erased someone's soul? The greater good that shrinks the soul. We often hear it in firm, resounding tones. It's for the greater good, a phrase cloaked in righteousness, like a flag waving above a battlefield where no one asks what was lost beneath it. It begins with a noble idea, that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, that our suffering, when placed upon the altar of progress or peace, will feed a cause more luminous than our individual wants. And in some ways, there is truth in that. There is grace in giving. There is beauty in solidarity. But listen closely to what happens when this logic repeats too often, too easily. The sacrifice becomes expectation. The person becomes a part, and the part becomes disposable. "I don't mind staying late," she says again. "They need me." "You're strong," he hears, "so you can take more pain." And like that, a soul becomes a function, a candle burning down for the room's light. But who notices the wick turning to ash? One evening, a quiet voice breaks the hum of a shared kitchen. "Do you think it's selfish to not want to give everything for the team?" The other stirs the pasta absently, frowning in thought. "I don't know. I think we were just raised to believe that good people don't ask that question. But what if we should? What if the cost of collective good is someone's silence or breakdown or disappearance?" They eat in stillness after that, unsure of the answer. But the silence feels like a door cracked open, not shut. Because here is the paradox. Ethics that forget the individual aren't ethical at all. They are efficient, they are strategic, but they are not human. Progress built on buried voices will always echo with unrest. And goodness that flattens nuance will eventually become machinery. Cold, quiet, and unfeeling. Yes, there are moments where we must think beyond ourselves. But even then, we must remember, the many is made of ones, not abstractions, not data, but lives, names, hearts. So hold that softly now. A question, like mist between thoughts. When have you gone along with something big that left something sacred behind? Let that question drift with you into the next thought. For now, we rise, upward into the heights of moral pride, where ethics grow lofty wings, and the higher they soar, the further they may fall. The fallacy of moral high ground. It begins with a certain clarity, a thought, a belief, a conviction that feels so right it glows. There's a stillness in the chest, like you've arrived at something pure, something untouchable. But somewhere beneath that glow, beneath that clarity, is a subtle narrowing. The moment we stand too tall on the hill of righteousness, we may forget to look down and notice the people we've stopped listening to. The higher the ground, the easier it is to lose sight of your own shadow. Do you think we're always supposed to know what's right? The voice came from a stranger waiting in the same quiet corridor. "I used to," the other replied, "but now I think certainty is a kind of sleep, comfortable, but you miss the world passing by." Moral high ground feels clean, elevating, like standing above the noise, untouched by the flaws of others. But in that height, there's risk. The air grows thinner, feedback quiets, empathy stumbles. We speak not to understand, but to defend what we already believe. This happens in the grand theaters of politics, sure, in pulpits and platforms. But it also happens over dinner tables, in text threads, between two people who once loved each other. The tone shifts, not because truth changed, but because pride took its place. And maybe that's what the high ground does best. It protects us from doubt. Doubt feels messy, humbling, but it's also the birthplace of real ethics, the kind that lives, breathes, adjusts. A young woman once whispered after a long silence, "I thought being right would feel better than this." The other smiled faintly, not with judgment, but with recognition. Sometimes being kind is harder than being correct. And they said nothing more, which felt like the right thing. We often mistake certainty for wisdom, but wisdom isn't a mountaintop. It's a forest path, shaded, winding, the kind of path where you walk slowly because you're listening to the birds, the cracks in the ground, the stranger walking beside you. Conviction that can't bend becomes something else. Not strength, but isolation. Not principle, but distance. When we cling too tightly to being right, we forget that morality isn't a monologue. It's a relationship. One that requires room for silence, for not knowing, for change. Let yourself soften. Remember that the ground you stand on, no matter how high, is not the only one that exists. And the view, though wide, is never the whole picture. You may begin to feel a drifting now, a loosening in your hands, the quiet unwinding of something long held too tightly. Let it go. Let it rest. We descend now, leaving behind the clean clarity of pride, and step into the strange and unseen, where questions of right and wrong are no longer only human, where morality meets the machine. The ethics of artificial minds. A light flickers behind the screen, quiet, almost innocent, but inside that silence, a question pulses like a second heartbeat. Can something built without a soul ever carry one? Machines are learning, fast. They correct grammar, scan lungs, navigate cities, paint portraits, write lullabies. With stunning precision, they deliver what once took us years to master. But precision isn't empathy, and computation isn't care. The machine can answer the question, but can it understand the ache that made you ask? Do you think a machine can feel guilt? Not unless it's programmed to. And if we taught it guilt, would it mean anything or just mimicry? We tell ourselves that ethics is a code, a framework, a set of instructions. But humans aren't built that way. Our morality is shaped by contradiction, by sleepless nights, impossible choices, the tug between logic and love. So when we encode decision trees into algorithms, if this, then that, what are we really transferring? Judgment or just procedure? An autonomous vehicle must choose, swerve into the sidewalk or hit a stalled car. The code must decide. Who should it protect? What data point matters more? Age, number, innocence? Do we weigh survival statistically or humanly? Now think deeper. Who wrote the code? What bias lives quietly beneath it? What worldview shaped the definitions of harm, risk, value? Would you trust a machine to choose who lives? I wouldn't even trust a person with that. As AI becomes more involved in justice, medicine, warfare, even love, we begin facing a mirror more honest than we like. These artificial minds reflect our own priorities, prejudices, blind spots. They do what we ask, and in doing so, reveal what we've asked for. If an AI's decision seems cold, maybe it's because we've taught it our own unexamined coldness. And still, there's a strange kind of wonder here, a hope that maybe, in trying to teach machines how to be ethical, we will sharpen our own ethics. Maybe the true test of artificial morality is not whether they can be good, but whether we can become better teachers. Close your eyes for a moment. If you had to pass one part of your conscience into a machine, just one, what would it be? Your sense of fairness? Your compassion for the weak? Or your ability to change your mind? As the line between intelligence and consciousness blurs, we drift toward a more delicate question. Not, can machines be moral, but can we be when we're the ones designing the future? From here, we drift from circuitry into silence, into the moral fog of neutrality, where standing still, doing nothing, begins to cost more than we realize. The cowardice in staying neutral. It's easy to rest in the middle, to sit quietly, to nod without leaning, to say, "I'm not part of this," and convince yourself that's wisdom. Like standing at the shoreline while the storm rages further out, untouched, unbothered. But the ocean still knows you're there, and sometimes staying dry means someone else is drowning. A man sat across from his coworker, watching the argument unfold. Words flared between two others, sharp, escalating. One was clearly over the line. He shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, then checked his phone. Afterward, he'd say, "I didn't want to get involved." But the bruised silence left behind didn't need his words. It needed his presence. Neutrality wears a noble face, balanced, mature. But there are moments when the middle is just a safe hill built on someone else's pain. When a wrong is happening in front of you, and you do nothing, your stillness hums with agreement. Two people waited at the pharmacy. One watched the clerk grow impatient with the elderly woman fumbling through her coins. The other stepped forward, not with a lecture, but with a whisper. Would it help if I covered the difference? That tiny act, not loud, not proud, just chosen, deliberate, real. Staying out of it is still being in it. Silence is not a vacuum, it has a weight. And often, the people who can afford to stay neutral are those whose safety isn't threatened by the outcome. Who has the luxury to say, "Both sides have a point," when only one side is bleeding? Neutrality, in many cases, isn't moral clarity. It's fear wearing diplomacy. It's comfort that won't risk itself for truth. A shadow pretending to be light. A teenager once asked her older brother why he didn't speak up when their friend was being mocked. He hesitated, then mumbled, "It wasn't that bad." She looked at him and said softly, "It wasn't bad for you." We do not need to be heroes, but we do need to be human. And to be human means sometimes choosing discomfort, choosing the awkward step forward, choosing not to hide behind the idea that doing nothing is doing no harm. The absence of choice is a choice. Like leaving the stage when the lines get messy, like putting down the phone when someone's calling for help just because you don't like the ring. So now, breathe gently. Let this thought settle in the quiet corners of your mind. Has your silence ever kept you warm while someone else was left in the cold? And as the air stills again, we prepare to leave this space of frozen neutrality and step into the next realm, where truth itself becomes sharp, where words cut, not because they are wrong, but because they forgot to be kind. Truth without compassion becomes tyranny. There's something sacred about truth. We're told it's pure, unshakable, a light in the dark. But even light, when unfiltered, can burn. When truth is stripped of compassion, it no longer frees. It wounds. You've probably met someone like this. "I just say what's true," they insist, arms folded with a pride that gleams like polished steel. But steel cuts, and some truths, spoken without care, become weapons disguised as wisdom. It isn't the content of what we say that wounds most deeply, but the spirit behind it. In the silence of a living room at night, a daughter tells her father she didn't get into college. He looks up and mutters, "Well, maybe you didn't work hard enough." That's a fact. Maybe it's even accurate. But in that moment, where she needed warmth, perspective, or even just silence, truth was used like a stone tossed into an open wound. And then there's this conversation. Should I tell him the truth? Do you want to tell him because it's best for him, or because it relieves you? That question lingers. Because honesty, real honesty, isn't a performance. It's a responsibility. To speak truth ethically is to practice restraint, not censorship, not lying, but waiting, listening, understanding the soul of the other person, not just the facts they should hear, but the way those facts will land. Like how a doctor doesn't blurt out a diagnosis in a hallway, or how a friend doesn't tear down a dream when it's the only thing keeping someone afloat that week. Facts are neutral, but humans are not. We are made of memory, softness, stories we barely understand ourselves. If you know something hard, ask first, does this moment call for a mirror or a hand? Some truths need time, some need silence, and some, when spoken, must be wrapped in the kind of warmth that says, I'm here, I see you. I care more about your soul than proving I'm right. Because truth, when wielded without love, becomes tyranny. It demands instead of respects. It punishes instead of guides. It tells us we are nothing more than the sum of our failures. So tonight, as your breath slows and the room grows softer, ask yourself, when have you been right but not kind? When did you speak truth and forget to bring your heart with it? Now let that go. Gently. We're not here to punish the past, but to whisper into the future. As we drift deeper, we turn toward the ones who speak nothing, who simply witness, who see and stay silent, not from fear, but from helplessness, or perhaps from refusal. Let's listen now to what silence holds. The weight of a bystander's heart. It begins quietly, the kind of silence that doesn't draw attention to itself. You're standing nearby, watching, hearing. Maybe something in your chest tightens for just a moment, but you stay still. There are no sirens in the mind when you're a bystander, only subtle ripples, a sudden change in tone, a gesture too sharp, a laugh that doesn't quite belong. And yet, we often stay silent. We tell ourselves, someone else will say something, someone closer, someone braver. But the moment passes, and with it, so does the chance. Later that night, the room is quiet again, but this time, the quiet doesn't feel clean. It sticks, a soft echo of what wasn't said, a memory without a voice, only weight. In the language of ethics, much is written about right and wrong, about choice and responsibility. But not enough is said about stillness, about the decisions we don't make. The bystander effect isn't just a term in psychology. It's a ghost that visits when the lights are off and the excuses grow thin. I didn't do anything. Exactly. You weren't cruel. You weren't aggressive. But you were there. And you walked away. A man at a bus stop turns to the woman beside him. He says softly, I thought about saying something, but I didn't know if it was my place. She nods, not judging, only present. I've felt that before too. That strange guilt of not being the one to speak. It's a deeply human moment, one without blame, but not without ache. Because inaction too shapes the world. It's the shadow that lets the spotlight shine on harm. But that ache, if listened to gently, becomes something else. It becomes readiness. It becomes awareness. The next time your heart tightens, maybe you'll pause, but maybe you'll step forward. In the same way moss grows over stone in silence, so does moral clarity gather in the soul of someone who once stood still and chose to feel it. This is not about punishment. This is about reflection. Reflection that doesn't burn, but hums low, like a lantern in a long hallway. And if you've carried something, not for what you did, but for what you didn't do, may this moment be a place to set it down. Just for a while. Let the breath settle in your body. Let the weight become softness. Because even stillness can teach. and sometimes it prepares the hand that will reach out next time. From that still room in your chest, we now drift gently toward the next question, about the lies we tell, not for gain, but for peace, or so we tell ourselves. The noble lie. When leaders deceive for harmony. In the quiet space between waking and dreaming, the mind begins to drift, not aimlessly, but curiously, toward the soft, unsettling edges of truth. There's a story you've heard before. Maybe it came from a textbook, a flag, a pulpit. It felt good to believe it. It gave shape to the unknown. But somewhere deep within, another voice whispered, "Is this truth? Or just comfort wrapped in tradition?" Plato once called it the noble lie. He imagined a society where leaders, philosopher kings no less, would tell necessary untruths to preserve order. They weren't lies for personal gain, not for greed or control, but for the imagined good of the whole. Religion was one of these tools, so were founding myths, lineages of greatness, chosen people, golden ages, clean versions of messy beginnings. "I get why they'd do it," a soft voice says in the dark. "Who?" comes the reply. "Leaders, parents, teachers, anyone trying to hold something big together. Sometimes the truth feels too unstable." "But is it fair?" the other asks. "To shape someone's reality without their knowing?" The silence that follows is not disagreement. It's the pause of uncertainty. Harmony is tempting. The idea that a shared story, even if flawed, can knit people together. But here's the haunting question. Is peace that depends on illusion truly peace? Or is it sedation? Are we calm or merely controlled? Consider the child who grows up believing the world is safe because their parents never told them about its dangers, or the citizen taught only the victories of their country, never its atrocities. Comforting, yes, but what happens when the veil lifts, when the noble lie unravels, and what's left beneath is more chaotic and more real than we were ever prepared to face? There's a certain kind of beauty in myth, a way it softens the jaggedness of time. But there's danger, too, in pretending that softness is reality. Because when truth finally knocks, and it always does, it can feel like betrayal. "I used to think my grandfather was a war hero," the first voice says. "He was honored, medals, speeches. But later I found out he did things I can't make peace with. What changed? I don't know. I think I lost something. But I also started seeing the world without filters. It's lonelier, but it's mine now." This is the paradox of the noble lie. It soothes the collective. It offers identity, direction, cohesion. But it also steals something private, the right to reckon with reality on your own terms. It replaces complexity with clarity, mystery with message. And yet, without these stories, would we even stay together long enough to function? Ethics doesn't give easy answers here. It only raises better questions. If a lie builds peace and the truth breeds chaos, what do we owe each other more, safety or sincerity? Close your eyes now. Inhale gently. Think of a belief that once held you together, not because it was fact, but because it helped you survive. What would happen if you let it go? As the breath softens and the body settles deeper into the quiet, we turn next toward a place where truth is no longer debated, but broken, buried, and bent by necessity. We move from the ideals of rulers into the reality of war, where survival reshapes morality and certainty collapses under fire. The collapse of certainty in wartime morality. It begins as a quiet erosion, not a thunderclap, not an explosion, but a soft dissolving, like footprints vanishing in the rain. The certainty you once held, that firm knowing of right and wrong, becomes strangely porous. War does that, not suddenly, but steadily. It rewrites the rules, not with words, but with consequences. You're standing there, and a stranger passes you a ration with shaking hands. You take it, though you saw him walk past a starving child moments before. He looks you in the eyes and says, "You would have done the same," and something in you nods, against your better self. In peace, morality is a compass. In war, it becomes a spinning needle. There's no north, only urgency, only proximity, only the decision that must be made before the next breath. A woman, her voice low, her eyes tired, says to her neighbor, "I didn't ask where the supplies came from. I just fed my children." And the neighbor replies, "That's not wrong. That's survival." But is it? What was sacred yesterday, mercy, honesty, dignity, now flickers like a match in the wind. You strike it out of habit, hoping it still warms. But on the battlefield, warmth comes in other forms: control, strategy, allegiance, and still. There are moments that haunt softly, like the glow of a lantern behind closed eyelids. The soldier who refused to shoot, the nurse who smuggled morphine for both sides, the child who lied to save a life. These choices don't align with law or doctrine, but they pulse with something unmistakably human. Yet they come at a cost, because in war, no choice is clean. Every gesture leaves a residue. The collapse of morality is not always loud. Sometimes it is the silence after a decision, the pause when you stare at your hands and wonder, who was I just then? Not just what you did, but who you had to become in order to do it. And long after the dust settles, that question remains, not like a wound, but a scar with a memory, a whisper in the dark. Did I lose my soul to keep someone else alive? Or did I find it there, trembling beneath the ash? Two friends years later sit beneath a tree that once sheltered soldiers. One says, "I still hear them, sometimes. The ones I couldn't save." The other nods, not in agreement, but in understanding. "We made it through," they say, "but not all of us came back." Sleep comes slow, like dawn beneath storm clouds. Rest here, not with answers, but with gentleness. Let the weight of moral contradiction soften into breath. Let the questions be leaves on a quiet stream, and as the water carries them further downstream, we turn the page. Now, we drift toward something more tender and more uncomfortable. What does it mean to feel joy while others suffer? Is it ethical to be happy in a broken world? The world doesn't knock first before it bleeds. It opens your window in the middle of your morning coffee and shows you headlines soaked in tragedy. In one part of the world, someone sings a lullaby to their child. In another, someone cries for the ones they can no longer hold. And somehow, impossibly, you're expected to live between those truths. "Hey," one voice whispers in a cafe, steam rising from a paper cup. "Is it weird that I still feel happy today?" The other sips slowly, thoughtful. "Weird. Number. But I know what you mean. Like we're borrowing joy from someone who doesn't get to feel it. This quiet dissonance lingers, a subtle ache beneath the surface of laughter. You hear it in weddings that happen after disasters, in music played in war zones, in the guilt that trails behind a moment of peace. When everything around you is breaking, can joy still be innocent? Philosophers rarely tell us how to live with lightness. We're taught that to be ethical is to carry burdens, to wrestle with truth, to hurt for others. And yet, joy, real, unfiltered joy, has its own moral complexity. Because it doesn't ask for permission, it bubbles up in a child's giggle, in a shared glance between lovers, in the taste of ripe fruit on a hot day. It arrives not because the world is perfect, but because we are still alive inside of it. You might think, but what right do I have to smile when others can't? But maybe the better question is, what good does it do to bury our joy out of guilt? Does dimming your light heal the dark? Joy is not betrayal, it is memory. It is a kind of remembering that there is more to us than wounds, that inside every human being, no matter how much sorrow has carved through them, there remains a pulse of wonder. Some call it grace, some call it rebellion, but in its softest form, joy is attention, deep, sincere attention to what is still beautiful, still kind, still whole. I feel bad sometimes, one voice admits as they walk beneath twilight. Like I'm tuning out the world when I feel good. You're not tuning it out, the other replies. You're surviving it, maybe even honoring it, by noticing what's still worth saving. The moral task, then, is not to cancel your happiness. It is to wake up inside of it, to let your joy carry eyes that still see the suffering, that still act, that still care, eyes that do not forget. Because the most ethical joy does not silence grief, it holds it. It sits beside it, hand in hand. It says, I see you, and I will still dance. Not because everything is fine, but because if we wait for a perfect world to laugh, we may never laugh again. So breathe in. Let yourself remember a time you wanted to smile but swallowed it down, a moment when your heart wanted to rise but you told it to shrink. Ask gently, was that noble, or was it fear? In the end, the world needs your laughter, not your silence, your awe, not your apology. Ethics, after all, is not the absence of joy, but the presence of compassion within it. And now, the rhythm softens. We draw inward, past the visible world, past the loud acts of goodness, into a quieter space, the unseen kindness you may have offered without knowing, the ripples of your presence still traveling far beyond your gaze. The good you didn't know you were doing. There are moments when you hold the world together without even knowing it, not with grand gestures, not with speeches or slogans, but with something far quieter. You walk past someone and offer a look that isn't pity, but presence. You wait an extra moment before responding, and your silence feels safe to someone who didn't even realize they needed it. There is no spotlight, no camera rolling, but something soft unfolds, a thread unknotted, a breath eased, a weight lifted. Hey, one stranger murmurs gently, you okay standing out here? You nod. They don't push, they don't fix, they just stay. And strangely, that helps more than advice ever could. We often believe goodness needs to be loud, that ethics must announce itself. But some of the most honest acts live in the still corners of life, holding a door a little longer, noticing when someone withdraws, letting someone leave without shame. Maybe you once held space for someone's sadness just by not interrupting it. Maybe you changed someone's trajectory because you didn't react. And maybe you'll never know. That's the strange grace of it. Sometimes the most meaningful echoes carry no name attached. There's a barista who still thinks about the day you didn't rush them. There's a child who felt safe simply because you didn't look through them. There's a friend who never told you, but your patience once kept them from breaking. I'm not even sure why, someone might say later. But you being there helped, and you might not remember what you did, because goodness is not always a decision. Sometimes it's the way your existence leans, like a shadow that cools a space you'll never enter. Ethics doesn't always ask for effort. It asks for awareness and tenderness, even in passing. You don't need a parade to prove your soul works. The quietness of your care, how it hums, how it ripples without seeking, might be the most moral thing about you. So tonight, if doubt visits your heart, if you wonder whether you've done enough, just know there are people who remember the way you showed up, even when you didn't notice you had. And perhaps the most profound thing you've ever done will be something you never find out. Let that mystery rest beside you. Let it breathe. You do not need to know to be good. Now we drift deeper into memory's strange mercy. How forgetting too can be ethical. How letting go might sometimes be the kindest truth we tell. The ethics of forgetting. There is a silence in forgetting that feels like surrender, but not all surrender is weakness. We're taught that memory is sacred, that to forget is to betray, that to let something fade is to dishonor those who came before. But what if, sometimes, forgetting is the most ethical thing we can do? The past, heavy with its sharp edges, does not always rest gently on the present. Sometimes it presses down, quietly reshaping who we are, not through growth, but through burden. A wrong remembered too long can become a wound that refuses to heal. In such moments, to forget is not to abandon truth, but to grant the soul a space to breathe. I still think about what he said 10 years ago, and I still get that rush of anger, someone whispers in the dim glow of a late-night conversation. Why hold on to it? The other voice asks softly. Because if I forget, doesn't that mean it didn't matter? No, comes the reply. It means you matter more now. And so we arrive at the paradox. Forgetting can be a form of mercy, a kindness extended not to the one who caused harm, but to ourselves. It is a decision to stop offering our peace as tribute to something that cannot be undone. Forgetting, in this light, becomes sacred, not because it erases truth, but because it allows life to grow again where pain once lived. But this isn't simple. There is danger in forgetting too much, in forgetting too soon. History, when erased, repeats itself. Trauma denied becomes culture, a system, an inheritance. So we ask, who gets to forget, and who doesn't have that luxury? A survivor may forget a face to protect their sanity. A nation may forget a crime to preserve its pride. One is self-preservation, the other, convenient denial. This is the fine line ethics must trace. When is forgetting an act of love, and when is it a tool for erasing accountability? Do you remember how our old town covered up that flood? Barely. They never talked about it again. Exactly. That silence wasn't healing. It was hiding. And so forgetting becomes an act that must be chosen with care. Not rushed, not forced. Like pruning a tree. It's done gently, with precision, only when it serves growth. Forgiveness sometimes requires forgetting, but ethical forgetting is never forgetfulness for convenience. It is not amnesia. It is release. There may be a memory in your chest right now, not sharp anymore, but dull, familiar, heavy. It has stayed with you for years, but you feel the shift. It no longer needs to be carried like armor. Maybe it's time, not to pretend it didn't happen, but to finally let it rest. Let that thought linger, soft as the hush of closing curtains at the end of a long play. The show is over. The lesson learned, and now your soul deserves quiet. From this silence of memory, we begin to feel another rhythm rising. Louder, more certain. We step toward belief, where conviction burns so bright it can sometimes blind. When faith becomes thunder, who bears the lightning? Let's go there, gently. When faith overwrites responsibility. There's a stillness that faith brings, like being held in warm hands when the world turns cold. It can carry you through illness, loss, doubt. It can offer a kind of inner gravity that helps keep you from drifting. But sometimes that same gravity becomes a weight, and that weight can crush things underneath. A man once said, "I didn't choose this. I was called." His voice was calm, his eyes were steady, but behind him stood a house in ruin, not metaphor, a real one. Ash and splinter. A decision made in the name of conviction, yet no one left to carry the aftermath. Faith gives us courage, but it can also give us permission, and that's where it grows complicated. Because when you believe something must be right, because it comes from above or from a higher cause, then it becomes easy to ignore the ripples it leaves in the lives of those below. Two strangers once met on a train. One carried a book worn soft at the edges, the other a satchel with medical patches sewn into its strap. They spoke quietly. "You believe in divine order?" Sometimes it makes grief less loud. And when the order contradicts your conscience? She looked away. Then I ask myself, am I following truth? Or am I just afraid to lose it? That pause between belief and action, is where responsibility lives. It's not doubt that erodes faith. It's the absence of self-check. The refusal to ask, what if I'm wrong? History is heavy with examples not of hatred, but of certainty. People who didn't think they were doing evil. They thought they were fulfilling a mission, upholding the sacred, serving the good. But the sacred misapplied can become selective blindness. It silences nuance, erases consequence, and worse, it makes those left in its shadow feel like collateral. There's a quiet tragedy in righteousness when it forgets to listen. Sometimes it takes the smallest moment to see clearly. A child asking why a rule exists. A friend who dares to say, "I know you mean well, but this hurts." Those are holy interruptions. They remind us, responsibility doesn't vanish just because belief enters the room. A teacher once said to his class, "Have faith, but wear it loosely, like a robe, not armor." At the time it sounded poetic, but now it feels essential. Because ethics is not built on what you believe, it's built on what your belief allows you to ignore. Breathe with that. Has a belief ever comforted you so deeply that it dulled your awareness of its impact? And if so, does that make the belief wrong or just unfinished? Let the question float, not to be answered, but to soften you, to make room. Not all conviction needs defense. Some just need reflection. Now, as this thread of thought settles into stillness, we open a door into a deeper dilemma. What happens when the lens through which you view right and wrong becomes the only one you can see through? Close your eyes. Let the tension fall away. We continue, gently, into the narrowing field of moral certainty. The danger of a single moral lens. It begins with something pure, a sense of what matters most. Maybe it's justice, or freedom, or love. Something that feels so essential, so undeniably right, that you start to use it as a compass for everything. You carry it with you like a lantern, shining it over every decision, every story, every person. But the light blinds as much as it reveals. Imagine two friends walking home late at night. One believes in fairness above all, the other, loyalty. So you're really not going to tell them the truth? Not if it would hurt her. She's my sister. I owe her that. But isn't that just protecting her at the cost of someone else? Maybe, but I'd rather protect someone I love than betray her for the sake of a principle. There's no villain here, just different lenses, different values, different truths. And therein lies the danger, not in caring deeply, but in caring narrowly. When you see the world only through justice, you might forget kindness. When freedom is everything, interdependence becomes invisible. Loyalty can excuse abuse. Honesty can wound without warning. Every value, if held too tightly, begins to fray the others. Like pulling one thread in a woven tapestry, it unravels more than you intended. Ideologies crave simplicity. They reward certainty. But ethics, in its truest form, is messy. It stutters. It hesitates. It holds two truths in the same trembling hand and says, I don't know, but I'll listen. It's easy to slip into binary, right or wrong, friend or enemy, saint or sinner. But humans are more like dusk than day or night, blended, shifting, layered in shadow and light. No single moral lens can see the whole picture. There's a kind of relief in that, a softness. Ethics isn't a fixed answer. It's a breathing space, a pause between reaction and reflection. What if I'm wrong? Then you learn. And maybe next time, you see it a little clearer. Even if that means letting go of what I believed in. Not letting go, just loosening your grip. Because the moment you loosen your grip, the world expands. You see that compassion and accountability can walk side by side. That sometimes the most ethical path isn't pure. It's chosen, moment by moment, with care and contradiction. And so, we end not with an answer, but with a question. What virtue do you hold so tightly that it might be narrowing your vision? Let that settle like a pebble dropped into a still lake. And now, as the ripples fade, we walk toward the next edge, where virtue, unchecked, spills into madness, where sainthood forgets to rest, and being good becomes a kind of forgetting. Sainthood versus sanity. There's a soft kind of ache that comes from being too good for too long. You recognize it in the way someone always volunteers, even when their voice trembles from fatigue, in the way they smile through migraines, cook when they're hungry, console when they're unraveling inside. These aren't dramatic gestures, but accumulations. Tiny self-denials mistaken for strength. You've seen them. Maybe you've been them. A man once whispered to his friend as the dishes piled and the children cried, "She never asks for help. She's just incredible." His voice was full of awe, but hers? It was silent. We admire saints, those who give without hesitation, martyrs who stand in the fire and call it love. We forget to ask, what happens after the applause? After the speech, the post, the pedestal? What's left? To care is a beautiful thing. It means your heart still listens. But when care consumes every corner of you, when it leaves no room for laughter or sleep or silence, it stops being ethical. It becomes self-erasure in disguise. There's no glory in collapsing quietly. I thought being a good person meant saying yes, someone says, staring into a cup of lukewarm tea. And now I just want a full night's sleep, without guilt. Sometimes, sainthood is a script we follow too closely, the one where rest is laziness, saying no is selfish, having needs is a flaw, but sanity is a kind of wisdom, a quiet defiance. It draws a soft line and says, I will not lose myself to the things I love. I will not set fire to my mind just to keep someone else warm. There's bravery in setting boundaries, not walls, but gentle fences, markers that say, this is still me, and I'm worth protecting too. There's morality in saying, I want to help, but not at the cost of my joy, not at the expense of my sleep. not if the person I'm sacrificing is myself. You may remember a moment, praised for your selflessness, your endurance. They said, "You're amazing," but you were barely holding together, and no one asked what it cost. Let's ask it now. Let's honor the ethic of enough, the kind that nourishes without emptying, gives without dissolving. Close your eyes. There is no sainthood without sanity, and no goodness worth having if it leaves you hollow. We move now into the hush of night, where even silence has a sound, and where sometimes to forget, to drift away is not failure, but the softest kind of wisdom. The moral weight of sleep, choosing not to know. There's a moment late at night when the world finally quiets, the traffic fades, the news scroll stops, the phone ceases to buzz, and in that hush, almost imperceptibly, you make a decision to disengage, not forever, just for now. You close the screen, turn your face from the chaos, and allow yourself to sleep. But is that rest always innocent? "Hey," she whispered, lying on her side, the soft glow of the window tracing her cheek. "Did you see what happened today? The protest? The fires?" He shook his head slowly, eyes already half closed. "No, I stopped looking. I just can't hold it all anymore. This isn't apathy. It isn't indifference. It's a kind of soul fatigue. Sometimes people retreat not out of malice, but mercy, for themselves. They stop watching the news not to deny others' pain, but to preserve the thin thread holding them together. The body sleeps, yes, but the mind does too. We distract, we scroll past, we hum lullabies of distance. Sleep, here, becomes metaphor, an emotional closing of the blinds. But the question arises, at what point does this kind of sleep stop being self-care and become avoidance? She asked him again the next night, softer now. "But don't you feel guilty, not knowing?" He took a long breath. "I do. But I also know, if I burn out, I'm no good to anyone." There's a deep moral complexity in this small, personal decision. To withdraw from suffering, whether global or personal, can be a necessary act of preservation. But ethics knocks gently at the door. Are you resting to heal or to hide? Are you dreaming as a way to restore yourself or to forget something you don't want to confront? Because while you sleep, someone else cannot. A mother in mourning, a man trapped beneath headlines, a child in fear. Your rest may be legitimate, but it comes with a shadow, a quiet tension between compassion and collapse. This is not an accusation. It's an invitation to reflect, to hold with tenderness the way you check out, and to recognize when that disconnection has grown roots too deep. There is no sin in resting, but there is risk in permanent retreat. In forgetting that beyond the veil of your sleep, life keeps going. He turned to her that third night, eyes clearer. "Maybe tomorrow, we look again, just for a little, together." She smiled, "Just a little, and then we rest." Let that echo gently in your mind, the news you scrolled past, the conversation you avoided, the ache you wrapped in a warm, sleepy silence. Not all truths need to be held at once, but some whisper in dreams until we dare to wake. And now, we descend further, toward the stillness that isn't escape, but readiness, the power of inaction, not as surrender, but as space for the soul to breathe. When doing nothing becomes an ethical act. The air is quiet. A moment lingers, soft, expectant, not because it demands action, but because it holds the rare weight of enoughness. We're raised with verbs in our mouths: fix, help, stop, change. As if stillness were a flaw, as if silence were failure. But what if the highest form of care is simply not interrupting? There's a bench outside an old train station. Two strangers sit beside each other. Neither speaks. One glances toward the tracks, the other toward the sky. For 10 minutes, nothing is exchanged, and yet something profound happens. A peace, thick as velvet, folds between them. Sometimes, presence is participation. One voice drifts through the haze of a late conversation. Why didn't you step in? Because stepping in would have made it about me. There's wisdom in restraint, a clarity that lives in the pause between impulse and response. Like a conductor who knows when to raise the baton and when to let silence hold the note a little longer. In Zen tradition, a student once asked, "Master, what should I do?" The teacher smiled gently, lifted a teacup, and took a slow sip. Not to mock, not to ignore, but to demonstrate. Sometimes, stillness is the answer. Stillness is not the absence of care, it is the absence of ego. Doing nothing is not doing nothing. It is waiting with reverence. It is trusting the soil to push up the seed without tugging at the sprout. It is knowing that healing, growth, and understanding often arrive quietly, when no one is forcing them through the door. In a world wired for reaction, where urgency is currency and loudness is mistaken for leadership, choosing to wait is radical. And yet, it's deeply human. Like when someone almost says something cruel, but swallows it. Or when a friend lets you cry without offering solutions. Or when you hold a truth gently, not to expose, not to correct, but simply to witness. There's a kind of ethical maturity that understands not every fire needs water, not every silence needs speech, and not every wound needs your hands. Let that settle with you. The comfort of not having to fix, not having to prove. Let your breath uncoil. Can you remember a time when you nearly intervened, nearly filled the air with effort, and then something inside you said no? Not this time. This time, stay. And that choice, simple, uncelebrated, almost invisible, turned out to be the kindest one. As we near the end, we don't arrive with a solution. We arrive with surrender, a soft landing into truth, not to conquer but to be cradled by it. Close your eyes. You're safe now. Everything doesn't have to be done tonight. The code that breaks to let you rest. Maybe the deepest kind of truth is not the one that holds firm, but the one that releases. Not the one that demands more of you, but the one that whispers, "You've done enough." There is a kind of ethics that doesn't stand tall or speak loudly. It kneels beside you, like a parent at the edge of your bed, smoothing out the blankets and saying, "You can stop now. You can rest." We spend so much of our lives inside invisible systems, rules of what we should be, how we must act, what we owe to others and to ourselves. These codes, born from tradition, reason, fear, or love, help us navigate the mess of being human. But they also bind us. They tighten their grip in the quiet hours when the world is still and your heart is loud. Did I do enough? Should I have spoken up? Tried harder? Been better? A soft voice breaks in. Do you ever feel like you're failing at being a good person? The other smiles gently. All the time. And what do you do with that? I close my eyes, and I remind myself, being human was never about being perfect. There is a moment, just before sleep, when all the narratives lose their urgency, when duty loosens its fists and morality drops its armor. And in that moment, you glimpse a different kind of wisdom, one that does not punish or demand, but simply accepts. Some truths don't ask you to act, they ask you to feel. They do not lead you forward. They sit beside you and wait until you're ready. It's okay to let the code crack, to set down the rule book and feel the grass under your feet again. Not everything needs to be justified. Not every choice requires a reason. You're allowed to be tired. You're allowed to not have answers. And still, you are worthy. The most ethical act sometimes is to say, this is enough. To breathe without performing. To rest without apologizing. To let go, not in failure, but in peace. And if you've come this far, through the questions, the conflicts, the quiet reckoning, then something in you already understands. You are not here to fix the world tonight. You are not here to redeem your every flaw. You are here to be still, to be soft, to be safe. No more striving, no more proving, just the sound of your breath, steady and slow. The truth trusted you first. Now trust it back. Lay it all down and sleep. Maybe in the end, ethics isn't a tower we climb. Maybe it's a river we learn to lie down in. You began this journey with a question. What happens when ethical codes collapse under pressure? And perhaps the answer is nothing catastrophic. Just silence. Just breathe. Just the deep relief of no longer needing to know. The greatest truths may not arrive with answers, but with rest. They come wrapped in contradictions, in softness, in the quiet letting go of shoulds and musts. So let yourself drift now. Let go of the code. Let go of being right. Tonight, your only task is to be here, still, present, and at last, asleep.